You have just woken up as a wasp on a cool dawn nest under a wooden beam. For the next 3 hours, you are going to experience chewing old wood into fresh paper, hunting a fat green caterpillar, and even fighting off a huge hornet at the nest edge. And this won't be easy, so good luck. But before we get into this journey of the paper wasp, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe, like the video, and why not leave a comment on where you are tuning in from and what animal you want me to cover next. Now let's begin this epic adventure together. You wake before the world does, clinging to a grey paper hexagon that forms part of your universe. The nest hangs beneath the eaves like a delicate lantern, and you are pressed against its surface as the first hints of light begin to warm the papery fibers around you. The temperature hovers in that uncomfortable zone where your muscles feel stiff and sluggish, your metabolism running at the bare minimum needed to keep you alive through the cool pre-dawn hours. Around you, your sisters begin to stir with tiny tremors that vibrate through the nest structure. Some are already awake, their antennae twitching as they sample the chemical landscape of morning. The founding queen, if she's still with you at this stage of the season, rests deeper within the nest's protective layers. Her presence felt more than seen through the subtle pheromone veil that permeates every fiber of your paper city. You perform the morning ritual that every wasp knows by instinct. Your antennae require cleaning. First, these delicate sensors are your primary tools for navigating the world, and any contamination from the night could mean the difference between finding food and starving. You draw each antenna through your mandibles carefully, removing the microscopic debris that accumulates during sleep. The process is methodical, almost meditative, as you restore full sensitivity to these crucial organs. Next comes the wing check. You flex your flight muscles, feeling them respond with the characteristic shivering motion that generates heat through rapid contraction. This thermogenesis is essential. Your wings won't function properly until they reach the right temperature, and cold wings mean no flight, which means no food, which means death. The physics are simple and unforgiving. As you prepare your body for the day ahead, you become aware of the subtle social dynamics playing out around you. A sister worker brushes past, and you automatically tuck your abdomen slightly, a submissive gesture that helps maintain the delicate hierarchy essential to colony function. These micro-interactions happen hundreds of times each day, each one reinforcing the social structure that keeps your society functioning. The scent layer tells you stories about the night that passed. The queen's pheromone provides a steady baseline of chemical information, confirming her health and continued presence. But there's something else, faint mildew edge, that signals potential moisture problems. You file this information away for later action. Nest hygiene isn't glamorous work, but fungal infections can destroy a colony faster than any predator. Your compound eyes begin to adjust to the growing light, processing the pixelated world that surrounds you. Each ommatidium captures a fragment of the visual field, and your brain assembles these thousands of tiny images into a coherent picture of your environment. Light levels are crucial for determining when it's safe to venture out. Too early, and you risk encountering nocturnal predators who are still active. Too late, and the best foraging opportunities will be claimed by other species. The hunger begins to assert itself, a hollow sensation that drives much of wasp behavior. Your carbohydrate reserves, depleted during the long night of basic metabolic maintenance, need replenishing before you can accomplish anything productive. This creates the fundamental tension of wasp existence. You need energy to find energy, and the margins are always thin. You scan the environment beyond the nest, your senses alert for any signs of danger. A bird sits motionless on a wire nearby, potentially predatory, but not showing the alert posture that would signal immediate threat. The morning air carries the usual mix of scents, flowering plants beginning to open, the earthy smell of dew-dampened soil, and the territorial markings of various creatures who pass through your area during the night. Your sisters are reaching similar conclusions about readiness. The nest begins to show the first signs of coordinated activity as workers complete their preparations for the day ahead. Some will focus on construction and maintenance, others on foraging, and still others on brood care. Your role will depend on a complex calculation involving the colony's immediate needs, your own physical condition, and the opportunities present in the environment. The decision point approaches rapidly. Your muscle temperature has reached the threshold where sustained flight becomes possible. The light level has increased enough to provide reasonable visibility, while most serious predators have retreated to their daytime hiding places. Your internal energy reserves can support the initial flight, though they'll need replenishing soon after takeoff. You adjust your position on the nest surface, orienting toward the direction that offers the best combination of launch trajectory and rapid access to cover if danger appears. Your sisters make similar preparations, creating a subtle choreography of readiness that speaks to the millions of years of evolution that have shaped these behaviors. The moment arrives with a clarity that admits no hesitation. Your wings begin their rapid beat, the frequency instantly recognizable to any nearby nestmates as the signature of your species. You release your grip on the familiar hexagonal surface and trust yourself to the uncertain air, leaving behind the security of the nest for the dangerous but necessary world beyond. Dawn flight, orientation loop. The first wing beats carry you into air that feels thick and cool against your cuticle. Each stroke of your wings creates tiny vortices that you can sense through specialized receptors, giving you constant feedback about your flight performance and the air conditions around you. The dense morning air provides good lift, but it also demands more energy to push through, creating the familiar trade-off that governs all Wasp decisions. Your immediate priority is orientation, reconfirming the landmarks that define your world and updating your internal map with any changes that occurred overnight. You begin a systematic arc around the nest, flying in expanding circles that allow you to memorize the visual panorama from multiple angles. This isn't casual sightseeing. It's essential navigation data that could mean the difference between finding your way home and dying lost in unfamiliar territory. The sun provides your primary compass reference, but it's more complex than simply noting its position. Your compound eyes can detect the polarization patterns of light scattered by the atmosphere, creating an invisible grid across the sky that remains consistent, even when clouds obscure the solar disk. This polarization compass works in conjunction with your internal chronometer to provide navigation data accurate enough to guide you across kilometers of terrain. Your first destination emerges from Memoria Hedge that typically offers good nectar sources in the early morning hours. The route requires careful planning because the most direct path crosses an open area where aerial predators might spot you, while the safer route along cover adds distance and energy costs. You choose a compromise path that balances risk with efficiency, trusting your experience to guide the decision. As you fly, you encounter the morning's first pollen, drifting golden particles that speak of flowers already opening to attract their pollinators. You taste trace sugars in the air, molecular breadcrumbs that help guide you toward promising foraging areas. Some of these chemical signals come from the flowers themselves, others from the honeydew secretions of aphids and other insects who have been feeding through the night. Your navigation system integrates multiple streams of information simultaneously. Optic flow rate, at which visual features pass by your compound eyes, tells you about your ground speed and helps you maintain stable flight. Odor plumes provide chemical trails that can lead to food sources or warn of dangers. Landmarks anchor your position in the familiar geography of your territory. The morning light reveals hazards that were invisible in the darkness. Spiderwebs stretch between branches, their silk strands nearly invisible but potentially lethal if you blunder into them at full speed. You've learned to watch for the telltale pattern of disturbance around websites. The slight deflection of leaves, the positioning of the spider itself, the way morning dew sometimes betrays the web's presence. Your avoidance maneuvers become a complex three-dimensional dance as you navigate between these threats while maintaining your general heading toward the hedge. Each course correction costs energy and time, but the alternative is far worse. You've seen too many sisters meet their end wrapped in silk, their struggles only serving to alert the spider to an easy meal. The hedge resolves from a distant green blur into individual plants, each with its own characteristics and potential. Your memory catalogues which species typically produce nectar at this hour, which ones might harbor predators, and which ones have proven reliable food sources in the past. This accumulated knowledge represents thousands of previous foraging trips, each one a small lesson in the complex ecology of survival. Your approach to the hedge demonstrates the calculated precision that characterizes successful wasp behavior. You don't simply dive toward the first promising flower. Instead, you conduct a reconnaissance pass that evaluates the entire area for both opportunities and threats. Other insects are already working the blooms, bees, butterflies, and various fleas, each focused on their own survival needs. The return journey tests your ability to integrate new information with existing knowledge. You've updated your mental map with current conditions, noted changes in the landscape, and gathered intelligence about food sources and potential dangers. Your internal odometer, based on wingbeat counts and optic flow calculations, provides an accurate estimate of distance traveled. Realighting on the nest requires a precision that speaks to the remarkable control wasp flight systems provide. You must adjust your approach speed and angle to account for the nest's movement in the morning breeze, coordinate with other returning foragers to avoid collisions, and execute the landing without damaging the delicate paper structure that represents your only refuge. Your first trophylactic exchange of the day involves offering a small sample of the nectar you've collected to a nestmate. This isn't generosity in any human sense, it's information transfer. The chemical composition of your sample tells her about the quality and location of the food source you've discovered, helping the colony optimize its collective foraging effort. The completion of this orientation flight reinforces the mental map that guides all your subsequent movements. You've confirmed that your familiar world remains largely unchanged, updated your knowledge of current conditions, and prepared yourself for the day's more serious foraging efforts. The process will repeat countless times throughout your life, each flight adding layers of detail to your understanding of the territory that sustains your colony. Wood pulp for paper. The nectar from your early flight has stabilized your immediate energy needs, allowing you to shift focus to one of the more demanding tasks that maintain colony infrastructure. The nest requires constant expansion and repair, and that means a steady supply of wood pulp to create the paper-like material that forms the walls of your world. This construction work is physically demanding and potentially dangerous, but it's absolutely essential for colony survival. Your first challenge is selecting appropriate raw material. Not all wood sources are created equal. You need fiber that's been weathered enough to be workable but not so degraded that it's lost structural integrity. A fence post catches your attention, its surface showing the kind of silvered aging that typically indicates optimal pulp potential. The wood has been softened by months of rain and sun, breaking down the lignin bonds that normally make plant fibers too tough to process. You land on the fence surface and begin your assessment. Your mandibles probe the wood grain, testing for the right combination of softness and fiber length. Too soft, and the resulting pulp will lack strength. Too hard, and you'll exhaust yourself trying to scrape off usable material. The surface also needs to be relatively free of fungal contamination, which could introduce pathogens to the nest environment. The rasping process begins with careful positioning. You anchor yourself with your legs, while your mandibles work in a controlled scraping motion, peeling away thin layers of weathered wood. The action produces a distinctive vibration that travels through the fence poster, signal that could attract competitors or predators. You pause periodically to scan for threats, balancing productivity with survival awareness. As you work, saliva mixes with the wood fibers, beginning the chemical breakdown that will transform rigid cellulose into malleable pulp. Your saliva contains enzymes specifically adapted for this purpose, proteins that can cleave the molecular bonds holding plant cell walls together. The process creates a distinctive taste, earthy, slightly bitter, with the complex flavor profile that comes from breaking down lignin and cellulose. The texture changes as you work the material in your mandibles, gradually transitioning from rough fiber to smooth paste. You monitor the moisture content carefully because too much water will make the pulp difficult to transport, while too little will result in material that won't adhere properly during construction. Experience has taught you to recognize the optimal consistency by feel and taste. A minor threat assessment interrupts your work as vibrations through the fence post signal the approach of another insect. Your immediate response is to position yourself defensively while continuing to work. You can't afford to lose the pulp you've already prepared, but you also can't ignore potential competition. The intruder proves to be a carpenter ant, focused on its own agenda and presenting no immediate threat to your activities. The pulp bolus gradually increases in size as you accumulate material. Your mandibles shape it into a form that's aerodynamically stable for transport, roughly spherical, but with slight compression that helps it adhere to your mouthparts during flight. The weight begins to affect your body position, shifting your center of gravity forward in a way that will require flight adjustments. Your return journey demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of Wasp flight systems. The additional mass of the pulp cargo changes your aerodynamic profile, requiring increased wing stroke amplitude and frequency to maintain lift. You instinctively adjust your flight path to account for the altered performance characteristics, choosing routes that minimize the energy costs associated with carrying cargo. The approach to the nest requires particular care with the heavier load. Your landing must be more gradual to avoid damaging either the pulp or the nest structure, and you need to coordinate with other returning workers to prevent collisions that could scatter precious construction material. The paper structure vibrates slightly under the impact of your landing, a reminder of both its delicate nature and its remarkable strength. Depositing the pulp begins immediately upon landing. You position yourself at the growing edge of a cell wall where new material is needed, carefully placing the pulp while it retains its plastic properties. Your mandibles smooth and shape the material, pressing it into the existing structure while ensuring proper adhesion between new and old layers. The construction technique reflects principles of engineering that humans are only beginning to understand. You create interlocking fiber patterns that distribute stress loads across the entire structure, use capillary action to control moisture distribution, and adjust wall thickness based on the structural demands of each location. The result is a building material that's simultaneously lightweight, strong, and insulative. Working alongside other construction workers requires constant micro-coordination. Antennae touch briefly as you pass, conveying information about work progress and material quality. These interactions help prevent duplication of effort and ensure that limited construction resources are allocated efficiently. The collaborative process emerges from simple behavioral rules rather than central planning. The groove you're working gradually takes shape as part of a hexagonal cell wall. The geometry isn't accidental. Hexagons provide the maximum enclosed volume for a given amount of construction material, while the angled walls distribute structural loads efficiently. Your contribution is a small part of an architectural achievement that rivals anything humans have accomplished. A brief grooming session concludes your construction work as you clean the pulp residue from your mandibles and antennae. The abrasive nature of wood fiber processing takes a toll on your body parts, requiring maintenance to preserve their functionality. You also need to remove any wood particles that might contaminate future food handling activities. Feeding. Early larvae. The transition from construction work to brood care represents a fundamental shift in both focus and technique. Where pulp processing demanded mechanical precision and physical strength, larvae feeding requires delicate manipulation and careful assessment of individual needs. You move through the nest interior, conducting your regular inspection circuit of the developing brood, each cell containing a larva at a different stage of development. The youngest larvae present as tiny, translucent grubs that can barely lift their heads from the cell floor. Their hunger signals are subtly slight writhing motion, a barely perceptible gaping of their mandibles, but unmistakable to your experienced senses. These small larvae require liquid nutrition, partially processed nectar that you can regurgitate directly into their waiting mouths. The feeding process requires precise control to avoid overwhelming their delicate digestive systems. Larger larvae demand a different approach entirely. Their protein requirements have increased dramatically as their body mass expands, driving the need for meat-based nutrition that only hunting can provide. You assess their condition carefully, noting the tension in their bodies as they strain against the confines of their cells, their more aggressive gaping behavior, and the subtle pheromone signatures that indicate protein deficiency. The textural contrast between the soft, vulnerable larvae and the rigid paper cells that contain them creates a constant reminder of the delicate nature of this work. One careless movement could damage a developing larva, representing weeks of wasted colony investment. Your mandibles, so recently employed in scraping abrasive wood fibers, now require the gentlest possible touch. You begin with the smallest larvae, regurgitating small quantities of the nectar you collected during your morning foraging flight. The liquid nutrition flows directly from your crop to their mouths, a transfer that requires careful coordination to prevent aspiration. Each larva receives a measured dose based on its size and apparent hunger level, with the goal of promoting steady growth without waste. The feeding process involves more than simple nutrition delivery. You also conduct a health assessment of each larva, checking for signs of disease, parasites, or developmental abnormalities that could threaten the entire brood. Your antennae probe gently around each cell, sampling the chemical environment for any off odors that might indicate problems. Hygiene maintenance forms an essential component of brood care. Larvae produce waste pellets that must be removed promptly to prevent bacterial growth and fungal contamination. You collect these frass pellets carefully, accumulating them for disposal during your next flight outside the nest. The process is unglamorous, but absolutely critical for maintaining the sanitary conditions that healthy brood development requires. The larger larvae receive different treatment protein-rich slurry that you've prepared by regurgitating and processing the insect prey captured during hunting expeditions. This meat paste provides the amino acids essential for rapid growth and development, but it also represents a significant energy investment by the colony. Every gram of protein fed to larvae is protein that could have sustained adult workers. As you work, the larvae respond with subtle vibrations that create a barely audible drumming effect throughout the nest. These micro sounds indicate contentment and healthy development, providing acoustic feedback that helps you assess the effectiveness of your feeding efforts. The rhythm is soothing, almost meditative, creating a background ambience that speaks to the biological success of your activities. The nutritional balancing act requires constant attention to both individual and colony-wide needs. Protein deficits in the brood trigger hunting urges that will drive your behavior for the rest of the day, while adequate nutrition allows for focus on other colony maintenance tasks. Your internal clock indicates that the morning's prime hunting window is approaching, creating pressure to complete current feeding tasks efficiently. A brief nectar sip provides the immediate energy needed for your own continued function. The sugar rush stabilizes your blood glucose levels and provides the ATP necessary for sustained flight during the hunting expeditions that lie ahead. This personal nutrition must be balanced against the needs of the brood. Every calorie you consume is one less available for larvae feeding. The queen's inspection tour interrupts your feeding routine as she makes her regular circuit through the brood area. Her presence triggers automatic behavioral adjustments. You move aside respectfully while continuing your work, allowing her unobstructed access to assess the developing larvae. Her antennae probe several cells, sampling the chemical signatures that provide information about brood health and development rates. The queen's pheromone signature reinforces the hormonal suppression that prevents your own ovarian development. This chemical control system ensures that colony resources remain focused on raising her offspring rather than competing reproductive efforts by workers. The pheromone exposure also provides a subtle sense of security and purpose that helps coordinate colony-wide behavior. Your assessment of the feeding situation reveals a growing protein deficit that will require immediate attention. Several of the larger larvae are showing signs of nutritional stress, their growth rates slowing as their protein requirements exceed current supply. This biological pressure creates an urgent hunting imperative that will dominate your immediate priorities. The completion of this feeding round sets up the tension that will drive the next phase of your activities. The brood's needs are clear and pressing, but satisfying them requires venturing into the dangerous world beyond the nest where predators, competitors, and environmental hazards await. The success of your hunting efforts will directly determine whether these developing larvae continue their progress toward productive adulthood or succumb to the nutritional limitations that claim so many wasp colonies. Caterpillar hunt. The protein deficit driving your hunting motivation has reached the point where delay is no longer an option. You launch yourself into the warming morning air with the focused intensity that characterizes predatory behavior, every sensory system tuned for the detection of suitable prey. The thermal columns rising from sun-warmed surfaces provide efficient lift, allowing you to gain altitude while conserving energy for the hunt ahead. Your target selection is based on a complex calculation involving prey size, accessibility, nutritional value, and capture difficulty. Caterpillars represent an optimal balance of these factors, large enough to provide substantial protein, soft enough to process efficiently, and common enough to be reliably located. Your compound eyes scan the vegetation below, while your antennae sample air currents for the telltale chemical signatures of caterpillar activity. The first promising lead comes from an odor plume carrying the distinctive scent of caterpillar frass. These waste pellets create a chemical trail that experienced hunters can follow to locate feeding caterpillars, but the trail interpretation requires skill developed through countless previous hunts. Wind direction, scent concentration, and the age of the chemical markers all factor into your navigation calculations. Your approach to the target area demonstrates the tactical sophistication that makes wasps such effective predators. Rather than diving directly toward the suspected caterpillar location, you conduct a careful reconnaissance that evaluates the entire hunting zone for both opportunities and threats. The vegetation could conceal not only prey but also predators who might view you as a meal. The caterpillar reveals itself through movement, a slight disturbance among the leaves that catches your attention. Despite its subtle nature, your positioning for the attack requires careful consideration of multiple factors: approach angle, escape routes, wind direction, and the need to avoid detection until the critical moment. You land on the underside of a leaf, using the vegetation itself as concealment. The strike must be perfect because caterpillars possess surprising defensive capabilities despite their soft appearance. Many species can regurgitate toxic stomach contents, thrash violently enough to dislodge attackers, or drop from their feeding sites to escape predation. Your mandibles target the head region, where a precise bite can disable the prey's defensive responses while avoiding the potentially toxic gut contents. The injection of venom through your sting provides rapid paralysis that immobilizes the caterpillar while keeping it fresh for processing. Your venom is precisely calibrated for arthropod nervous systems, blocking nerve transmission in a way that stops movement without immediately causing death. This biological technology allows you to subdue prey much larger than yourself with minimal risk of injury. A bird shadow passing overhead triggers an immediate freeze response that interrupts your initial prey processing. The shadow could indicate a predator capable of taking both you and your prize, forcing a rapid evaluation of threat level versus the value of maintaining your catch. You remain motionless until the shadow passes, then quickly resume work with heightened alertness. Processing the caterpillar requires removing the gut contents that could contain plant toxins harmful to developing larvae. Your mandibles work with surgical precision, extracting the protein-rich muscle tissue while discarding the potentially dangerous digestive tract. This field processing reduces the weight you'll need to carry while ensuring that only safe, nutritious material returns to the nest. The distinctive hemolymph scent released during processing attracts the attention of scavenging ants who patrol the area for exactly these opportunities. Your defensive posture warns them away while you complete the critical work of preparing your catch for transport. The ants represent competition for resources and potential threats to your safety, adding another layer of complexity to the hunting process. Quick grooming removes plant hairs and debris that accumulated during the capture process. These foreign materials could contaminate the nest environment or interfere with the careful chemical balance that maintains colony health. Your mandibles and legs work efficiently to clean your body while maintaining control of the processed prey. The consolidation of your catch into a manageable pellet demonstrates the remarkable manipulation capabilities of wasp anatomy. Using mandibles, legs, and body position, you compress the protein paste into a form that's aerodynamically stable and securely attached for transport. The shape must balance aerodynamic efficiency with secure attachment to prevent losing your prize during the return flight. Your return journey requires significant flight adjustments to accommodate the additional weight and altered aerodynamics of carrying substantial prey. Wing stroke amplitude increases to maintain lift, while flight speed decreases to conserve energy for the extended effort required. Your route selection favors efficiency over caution. The protein is too valuable to risk losing through extended exposure to predation. The anticipation of larval response drives urgency in your return flight. You know from experience that fresh protein will trigger immediate feeding responses from hungry larvae, and the sooner you can deliver this nutrition, the more efficiently it will be converted into larval growth. Time delays reduce the nutritional value of your catch and increase the risk of spoilage. Your approach to the nest requires careful coordination with other returning foragers to prevent mid-air collisions that could scatter precious cargo. The paper structure ahead represents safety and successor place, where your hunting efforts can be converted into the next generation of colony members. The completion of this hunting cycle will trigger immediate satisfaction in the hungry larvae awaiting your return, but it will also reset the pressure for continued protein acquisition as their growth demands accelerate. Protein delivery, social exchange. Your landing on the nest with fresh protein triggers an immediate response that demonstrates the sophisticated communication systems underlying Wasp social organization. The chemical signature of your catch disperses through the air around the nest entrance, creating molecular announcements that reach every worker within seconds. Sisters who are engaged in other tasks pause their activities, antennae twitching as they process the information carried on these scent molecules. The formation of a trophallaxis circle happens with remarkable speed and precision. Workers converge on your position not through central coordination, but through individual responses to chemical cues and social signals. Your sisters position themselves in a loose ring around you, each maintaining enough distance to avoid interference, while remaining close enough for efficient food transfer. The geometry emerges naturally from behavioral rules encoded in wasp genetics. Your allocation strategy prioritizes the oldest and hungriest larvae, a decision driven by efficiency calculations that maximize colony productivity. The largest larvae represent the greatest investment of colony resources and are closest to contributing their own labor to colony success. Feeding them first ensures that this investment doesn't go to waste due to protein shortages at the critical final stages of development. The protein paste transfers from your mandibles to those of receiving workers in carefully measured portions. Each sister evaluates the quality and quantity of her share, adjusting her own feeding plans based on this new information. The chemical composition tells them about the nutritional value of your catch, while the quantity indicates how much additional hunting pressure the colony faces. The larval response to fresh protein is immediate and unmistakable. As receiving workers deliver the processed caterpillar to hungry larvae, you can hear the subtle change in the nest's acoustic environment. The satisfied drumming vibrations of well-fed larvae create a background rhythm that speaks to biological success, while the continued agitation of unfed larvae maintains pressure for additional hunting efforts. Your reward for successful hunting comes in the form of larval secretions, amino acid-rich droplets that larvae produce when receiving adequate nutrition. These secretions provide high-quality energy that sustains your continued hunting efforts while creating a positive feedback loop that encourages further predatory behavior. The exchange represents a sophisticated biological economy where successful hunters receive premium nutrition. The chemical information spreading through the colony creates subtle shifts in behavioral priorities. Workers who were focused on construction tasks begin to show increased interest in foraging activities, while others adjust their territory patrols to avoid competing with your proven hunting grounds. This dynamic reallocation of effort happens without central planning, emerging from individual responses to shared chemical information. A brief dominance interaction develops between two senior workers over access to the protein distribution sequence. The confrontation involves raised wings, aggressive antennal contact, and threatening abdominal postures, but stops short of actual violence that could damage colony infrastructure or waste energy. Your position in this hierarchy influences your own access to resources and future hunting opportunities. You choose to avoid the conflict entirely, stepping aside to allow the dominant workers to settle their dispute without interference. This energy conservation strategy reflects a longer-term calculation that values sustained hunting capability over short-term status gains. The protein you've already delivered ensures your own nutritional needs are met, making conflict avoidance the optimal choice. The queen's inspection of the feeding activity provides another layer of social coordination. Her antennae probe the area where protein distribution occurred, sampling chemical residues that tell her about hunting success rates and nutritional quality. Her pheromone response to this information will influence worker behavior for hours, either encouraging continued hunting or directing effort toward other colony needs. Repairing a cell seam that suffered minor damage during the feeding activity gives you a chance to use the remaining protein paste productively. The organic compounds in processed prey can serve as binding agents that strengthen paper construction, creating a multi-purpose use for hunting proceeds that maximizes resource efficiency. Your mandibles smooth the repair with practiced precision. The ventilation response to increased metabolic activity demonstrates another aspect of wasp environmental management. As larvae process the protein you've delivered, their metabolic heat output increases, raising the temperature in the brood area. Workers automatically begin wing fanning to circulate air and prevent overheating that could damage developing larvae or create conditions favorable to pathogenic bacteria. The chemical gradient spreading through the colony now carries information about nutritional status that will influence decision-making for the rest of the day. Areas of the nest receiving adequate protein show decreased urgency signals, while sections still experiencing deficits continue to generate the chemical pressures that drive hunting behavior. This real-time nutritional accounting helps coordinate colony-wide resource allocation. Your own internal assessment reveals that the protein delivery has improved colony nutrition, but hasn't eliminated the fundamental deficit driving hunting pressure. The larvae's rapid growth means that today's successful hunt becomes tomorrow's nutritional requirement, creating a relentless cycle that will dominate your activities throughout the active season. The brief satisfaction of successful provisioning quickly transitions into planning for the next hunting expedition. The social feedback from protein delivery reinforces the behavioral patterns that make hunting expeditions worthwhile despite their risks and energy costs. The larval secretions, the improved colony chemistry, and the subtle status gains from successful provisioning all contribute to motivation for continued predatory activity. This biological reward system ensures that dangerous but necessary hunting behavior remains attractive to individual workers. Architectural expansion. The improved nutritional status of the colony creates conditions favorable for structural expansion, shifting your focus toward the engineering challenges that define Wasp construction capabilities. The nest's current configuration can support the existing population, but the growing brood will soon require additional cells, creating pressure for architectural development that pushes the boundaries of paper construction technology. Your assessment of the nest's underside reveals the optimal location for new cell construction, a position that maintains the radial symmetry essential for structural integrity while providing adequate access for future maintenance. Brood care. The placement decision involves complex calculations about weight distribution, thermal management, and traffic flow patterns that will affect colony efficiency for months to come. The geometric principles governing cell placement reflect millions of years of evolutionary optimization. Each new hexagon must align perfectly with existing structures to maintain the mathematical perfection that maximizes enclosed volume while minimizing construction material requirements. Your positioning work requires precision that would challenge human engineers equipped with measuring instruments. Layer growth follows algorithmic rules that create thermal buffering between the developing brood and the external environment. The spacing between cell layers allows air circulation that prevents overheating, while providing insulation against temperature fluctuations that could disrupt larval development. Your construction work contributes to an environmental control system that maintains optimal conditions for biological processes. The pulp layering technique demonstrates the sophisticated material science knowledge encoded in Wasp behavior. You apply thin ribbons of processed wood fiber in overlapping spirals, pressing each layer with mandible tips to achieve consistent thickness and optimal fiber orientation. The resulting composite material combines strength, flexibility, and insulation properties that exceed many human-engineered building materials. Measuring thickness relies on mandibular memory, the ability to recall the precise gape distance that produces optimal wall dimensions. This biological measurement system provides consistency across construction projects while adapting to variations in raw material properties. Your mandibles function as both construction tools and precision measuring instruments. Cooperative building requires coordination between multiple workers to maintain the plastic properties of wood pulp during construction. The timing must be perfect, too slow, and the pulp hardens before proper shaping. Too fast, and structural integrity suffers from inadequate curing. You work in overlapping shifts with sisters, each adding material while the previous layer remains workable. A micro crack in an adjacent cell wall demands immediate attention before it propagates into structural failure. Your repair work involves carefully removing damaged material and replacing it with fresh pulp, applied in reinforcement ridges that distribute stress loads away from the weak point. The repair technique reflects an understanding of structural engineering that prevents minor problems from becoming major failures. Structural resonance testing provides quality control for your construction work. Light tapping with antennae generates vibrations that travel through the paper matrix, revealing information about density, adhesion, and structural integrity. Your auditory receptors can detect frequency changes that indicate construction problems invisible to visual inspection. The construction process includes regular interruptions for parasite surveillance, as the exposed pulp and increased human activity around construction sites can attract opportunistic invaders. Your antennae probe for chemical signatures that indicate mite infestations, bacterial contamination, or fungal growth that could compromise the structural integrity of new construction. Color variations in the paper matrix tell stories about construction history and material sources. Fresh pulp appears lighter than aged material, creating subtle patterns that document the growth phases of the nest. Your work adds to this visual record while maintaining the aesthetic consistency that characterizes successful wasp architecture. The satisfaction derived from successful construction work provides psychological rewards that balance the physical demands of building activities. Each completed cell represents expanded colony capacity, improved protection for developing brood, and enhanced survival prospects for the entire community. This sense of accomplishment motivates continued construction effort despite the energy costs involved. Quality control during construction requires constant attention to detail that prevents small problems from becoming catastrophic failures. Your inspection work identifies potential weak points before they can compromise structural integrity, while your repair efforts ensure that the nest remains capable of supporting growing populations throughout the active season. The acoustic environment around construction sites changes subtly as new cells are added to the nest structure. The resonant frequency of the paper matrix shifts with each addition, creating new harmonic patterns that provide information about structural condition. Your auditory monitoring of these changes helps guide construction decisions and identify areas requiring attention. Chemical maps. Memory. The wasp mind operates through chemical landscapes that humans can barely comprehend, processing information streams that flow through molecular channels invisible to visual perception. Your internal cognitive map of the world consists primarily of scent signatures layered across spatial memories, creating a navigational system that rivals GPS technology in accuracy while surpassing it in biological integration and environmental responsiveness. The scent panel of your immediate environment provides a real-time chemical readout of colony status and external conditions. The queen's pheromone establishes the baseline signature that defines home, while brood pheromones pulse in rhythmic waves that correspond to feeding cycles and developmental stages. Alarm traces linger faintly from yesterday's predator encounter, gradually fading as environmental air circulation replaces them with fresh chemical information. Memory consolidation from your morning flights involves a complex neural process that associates nectar source locations with solar azimuth angles, creating a spatial database that accounts for the sun's movement throughout the day. This astronomical integration allows you to return to productive foraging sites, even when lighting conditions have changed significantly, compensating for solar movement through internal chronometer adjustments. Antennal grooming assumes critical importance as a maintenance procedure for your primary sensory equipment. Each antenna contains thousands of chemoreceptors capable of detecting molecular concentrations measured in parts per billion. But this sensitivity requires perfect cleanliness to function properly. Contamination from construction work, prey processing, or environmental exposure can severely compromise your ability to navigate and assess conditions. The neural miniaturization that characterizes wasp cognition demonstrates remarkable efficiency in biological information processing. Your brain contains fewer than 1 million neurons compared to the human brain's 86 billion, yet it supports navigation capabilities, social coordination, construction planning, and predatory behavior that would challenge artificial intelligence systems requiring massive computational resources. Visual mosaic processing creates a pixel-like representation of the world that emphasizes motion detection over fine detail resolution. Your compound eyes excel at detecting the movement patterns that indicate predators, prey, or navigation landmarks, while sacrificing the high-resolution imagery that characterizes human vision. This trade-off optimizes your visual system for survival-relevant information. Olfactory plume gradient interpretation requires sophisticated computational abilities that process three-dimensional chemical information in real time. Scent molecules disperse through air in complex patterns influenced by wind speed, temperature gradients, humidity levels, and physical obstacles. Your ability to track these molecular trails backward to their sources represents one of nature's most impressive navigation achievements. Humidity shift detection provides early warning of weather changes that could affect flight safety and foraging success. Your hygroreceptors can sense atmospheric moisture changes hours before visible cloud formation, allowing proactive adjustment of activities to minimize exposure to dangerous conditions. This meteorological sensitivity helps explain Wasp's success in environments with unpredictable weather patterns. The meditative quality of information processing creates brief periods of reduced activity that appear almost contemplative by human standards. During these moments, your neural networks consolidate spatial memories, integrate chemical information, and update the cognitive maps that guide future decisions. These processing pauses are essential for maintaining the mental clarity that survival demands. Decision branch calculations weigh the energetic costs and potential benefits of different behavioral options. Your assessment of whether to pursue additional protein hunting versus nectar collection involves complex variables, including current colony, nutritional status, environmental conditions, personal energy reserves, and time remaining in the active day. The calculation speed exceeds human conscious decision-making by orders of magnitude. The choice to pursue sugar over protein sets the trajectory for your next activity cycle, but the decision remains flexible enough to change if new information suggests alternative priorities. This behavioral adaptability allows rapid response to changing conditions while maintaining overall efficiency in resource allocation. Your cognitive flexibility represents a key survival advantage in unpredictable environments. Spatial memory integration creates detailed mental maps that extend far beyond immediate visual range. Your territory knowledge encompasses dozens of square kilometers, including seasonal variation in resource availability, predator activity patterns, weather shelter locations, and navigation landmarks. This geographic database guides efficient movement and resource exploitation throughout your active range. Chemical signature recognition allows identification of individual colony members, foreign wasps, predator species, prey animals, and environmental conditions through molecular analysis alone. Your olfactory discrimination capabilities can distinguish between closely related species and detect health status, reproductive condition, and recent activities of other organisms. This chemical literacy provides information comparable to human facial recognition and situational awareness. Nectar, honeydew forays. The decision to prioritize carbohydrate collection shifts your sensory focus toward the subtle chemical signatures that indicate optimal nectar availability. Flowers that have warmed in the morning sun concentrate their sugars to attract pollinators, creating a brief window of peak resource quality that experienced foragers learn to exploit. Your flight path reflects knowledge accumulated over hundreds of previous nectar runs, avoiding wasted effort on flowers that haven't yet reached productive maturity. Your approach to flower handling demonstrates the specialized techniques that maximize energy extraction while minimizing time exposure to predation. Deep corolla blooms require a different strategy than open disc, flowers the former demanding careful positioning to reach nectar reservoirs, while the latter allow rapid sampling across multiple flowers in quick succession. Your mandibles and proboscis work in coordination to extract maximum nutrition from each flower visit. The territorial bee working nearby represents both competition and potential threat, requiring careful behavioral calibration to avoid conflict while maintaining access to shared resources. Species interaction etiquette has evolved to minimize energy waste on futile conflicts, with each insect species developing preferred flower types and feeding times that reduce direct competition. Your assessment of the bee's behavior guides your own foraging choices. Aphid honeydew presents an alternative carbohydrate source that often provides higher sugar concentrations than floral nectar, but accessing it requires navigating the complex social dynamics of ant-aphid partnerships. The ants that tend aphid colonies aggressively defend their sugar-producing livestock, creating a risk-reward calculation that balances nutritional benefits against potential injury from ant defensive responses. Your energy budgeting strategy involves continuous assessment of extraction costs versus nutritional gains, optimizing the time spent at each resource site to maximize net energy acquisition. Quick micro-sips allow sampling of resource quality without major time investment, while full tank fills provide sustained energy for extended activities. The decision between these approaches depends on immediate needs and overall foraging opportunities. The discovery of a navigational shortcut through a gap between shrubs demonstrates the ongoing optimization that characterizes Wasp spatial learning. This route reduction saves both time and energy on future foraging trips, while reducing predation exposure through decreased flight time. Your mental map updates immediately to incorporate this new information into future trip planning. Crop storage allows temporary accumulation of surplus sugars that can be shared with nestmates or reserved for high-energy activities like construction work or extended hunting expeditions. The slight abdominal distension that accompanies crop filling changes your flight characteristics, requiring aerodynamic adjustments that balance cargo capacity with flight performance. The encounter with a rival colony worker creates a tense moment that tests inter-colony recognition systems and territorial boundaries. Mutual antennal assessment allows chemical identification of colony affiliation, while careful behavioral signaling indicates intentions and threat levels. Both workers choose avoidance over conflict, recognizing that energy spent fighting is energy unavailable for productive activities. Your return to the nest with collected sugars initiates another round of trophallaxis that distributes carbohydrate resources to workers engaged in energy-intensive activities. The sugar sharing follows priority systems that ensure critical colony functions receive adequate fuel, while surplus resources support optional activities like expanded construction or extended territory patrols. The acceleration of colony activity tempo reflects improved nutritional status as carbohydrate resources reach workers who had been operating on minimal energy reserves. Construction projects resume with increased vigor, hunting expeditions extend their range, and maintenance activities that had been deferred due to energy constraints return to normal schedules. Flight efficiency calculations demonstrate the remarkable energy management capabilities that allow wasps to exploit scattered resources across extensive territories. Your ability to assess flight costs, resource quality, and opportunity costs in real time enables profitable foraging, even when individual resource sites provide marginal returns. This computational ability represents a significant evolutionary advantage. The sensory satisfaction of successful foraging provides psychological rewards that reinforce productive behavioral patterns. The taste of high-quality nectar, the successful navigation of territorial boundaries, and the efficient completion of resource extraction all contribute to positive feedback loops that maintain motivation for continued foraging effort. Resource mapping updates occur continuously during foraging expeditions, with each flower visit providing information about current nectar availability, bloom timing, and competition levels. This dynamic database guides future foraging decisions while adapting to seasonal changes in resource distribution and quality. The integration of multiple carbohydrate sources, floral nectar, extrafloral nectaries, and aphid honeydew creates a diversified energy portfolio that reduces dependence on any single resource type. This diversification strategy provides stability in unpredictable environments where individual resource sources may fail due to weather, predation, or seasonal changes. Intruder repulsion. The chemical alarm that cuts through the nest's normal scent profile hits your receptors like a molecular scream, instantly triggering defensive responses honed by millions of years of social evolution. A foreign wasp has breached the territorial boundary and is conducting what appears to be an intelligence-gathering mission. Her antennae probing the edges of brood cells with the calculated precision of a potential raider, assessing colony wealth and defensive capabilities. Your rapid orientation toward the threat demonstrates the remarkable coordination systems that transform individual wasps into components of a collective defense network. The alarm pheromone disperses through the paper matrix of the nest, carried by air currents and molecular diffusion to reach every worker within seconds. Your response integrates with those of dozens of sisters, creating a defensive mobilization that emerges without central command. Triangulating the intruder's exact position requires processing wing vibration patterns that travel through both air and the nest structure itself. Each species produces distinctive flight signatures, and experienced defenders learn to distinguish between colony members, foreign wasps of the same species, and entirely different wasp species that might pose varying levels of threat. Your auditory analysis confirms this is a conspecific intruder rather than a more dangerous predatory wasp. Your threat display unfolds with practiced precision wings raised to increase apparent body size, abdomen partially curled to expose the sting while maintaining readiness for rapid deployment, and antennae positioned for both chemical sampling and potential combat use. These signals communicate defensive capability while offering the intruder opportunities to withdraw without triggering escalated conflict that could prove costly for both parties. The antennal duel that follows represents a complex exchange of chemical and mechanical information. Your antennae contact those of the intruder in a ritualized assessment that determines colony affiliation, reproductive status, and aggressive intent. The chemical signatures exchanged during this contact provide detailed information about colony strength, recent feeding success, and defensive readiness that influences subsequent tactical decisions. Grappling begins when chemical assessment confirms hostile intent and withdrawal negotiations fail. Your mandibles lock with those of the intruder, while legs seek purchase for leverage advantage. The combat demands careful sting management. Venom supplies are limited and best reserved for situations where paralysis provides decisive advantage. Most defensive encounters rely on mechanical combat, supplemented by minimal venom use. Collective mobbing transforms individual defensive action into coordinated group response. As alarm pheromone concentrations reach threshold levels that trigger mass mobilization, sisters converge from throughout the nest, creating a defensive swarm that overwhelms individual intruders through numerical superiority rather than individual combat prowess. The intruder faces a choice between immediate withdrawal and potentially fatal confrontation with dozens of defenders. The pheromone dispersal through the paper matrix demonstrates the sophisticated communication network that nest architecture creates. Chemical messages travel through the pulp fibers faster than they could disperse through still air, while the three-dimensional structure of the nest allows complex information gradients that guide defensive responses to precise threat locations. Intruder disengagement occurs when the cost-benefit analysis tips decisively toward retreat. Your chase response extends only far enough to ensure genuine departure rather than tactical repositioning for renewed assault. Energy conservation principles prevent pursuit beyond the point where colony defense transitions into wasteful aggression that diverts resources from productive activities. Post-conflict grooming serves multiple functions beyond simple hygiene maintenance. Removing foreign pheromone traces prevents confusion in colony chemical communication systems, while physical cleaning addresses minor injuries that could become infection sites if neglected. Your mandibles work systematically to eliminate chemical contamination that could disrupt normal social interactions. Cell rim repair addresses the minor structural damage that inevitably results from defensive struggles conducted in close proximity to delicate paper construction. Scuff marks and stress fractures require immediate attention to prevent propagation into major structural failures. Your repair work demonstrates the importance of maintaining infrastructure integrity even during crisis situations. The brood inspection that follows defensive action ensures that developing larvae haven't suffered collateral damage from the conflict. Stress responses in adult wasps can affect larval care quality, while physical disturbance of cells could injure vulnerable pupae. Your systematic examination of each cell provides quality assurance that colony reproductive success remains on track despite security disruptions. Re-establishing calm requires gradual reduction of alarm pheromone concentrations through active air circulation and metabolic breakdown of chemical signals. Workers engage in increased wing fanning to accelerate air exchange, while normal activities gradually resume as threat indicators fade to background levels. The transition from defensive alert to normal operations must be managed carefully to prevent false alarms. Defensive threshold adjustment represents the learning component of security encounters. The successful repulsion of an intruder provides information about colony defensive capabilities while confirming the effectiveness of current security protocols. Your individual threat assessment criteria updates slightly, incorporating lessons learned about recognition cues and response timing that improve future defensive performance. The encoded lessons from defensive encounters accumulate over time to create sophisticated threat recognition systems that can distinguish between genuine security challenges and harmless environmental disturbances. This learning process reduces energy waste on unnecessary defensive responses while maintaining appropriate vigilance against real threats to colony survival. Rain event strategies. The barometric pressure drop registers in your sensory systems hours before the first visible signs of approaching weather, triggering a cascade of behavioral adjustments that demonstrate the remarkable environmental sensitivity that characterizes successful social insects. Your cuticle detects the humidity film that forms when atmospheric moisture content rises beyond normal levels, while internal pressure sensors respond to the subtle atmospheric changes that precede significant weather events. Larval protection becomes the immediate priority, as weather conditions threaten the vulnerable developing brood that represents the colony's future reproductive success. Your mandibles work quickly to create partial caps over exposed cell openings, using available pulp material to fashion temporary covers that will deflect water droplets while maintaining adequate ventilation for larval respiration. This emergency construction requires speed over aesthetic perfection. The defensive positioning that follows involves workers flattening themselves across critical areas of the nest structure, creating living shields that protect brood cells from water intrusion through gaps in the paper matrix. Your body becomes part of the colony's weatherproofing system, accepting personal exposure to protect the developing larvae, whose survival justifies individual sacrifice. Rain arrival transforms the acoustic environment as water droplets impact the paper structure, creating percussion patterns that vary with rainfall intensity and wind direction. The vibration patterns provide real-time information about storm severity, while masking the subtle sound cues that normally guide wasp navigation and communication. Your auditory processing adapts to filter useful signals from the noise of precipitation. Water runoff management tests the engineering principles underlying nest construction, as gravity channels accumulated moisture along designed drainage paths. The petiole attachment point bears increased weight loads, while paper structures flex under the mechanical stress of water accumulation. Your monitoring of structural integrity identifies potential failure points before they compromise colony safety. Internal moisture control requires coordinated effort to prevent fungal establishment in the humid conditions that rain creates within the nest microenvironment. Wing fanning increases to accelerate air circulation, while workers position themselves to create convection currents that move humid air away from brood areas. The biological air conditioning system operates on principles of thermodynamics and fluid mechanics. Opportunistic water collection takes advantage of the precipitation to address hydration needs that normally require energy-expensive flights to distant water sources. Your mandibles collect droplets that form on accessible surfaces, storing water in your crop for later use or immediate sharing with nestmates. Rain events provide resource opportunities that partially compensate for the constraints they impose. The post-rain emergence requires careful assessment of environmental conditions before resuming normal activities. Surface tension effects create water films that could trap insects attempting premature flight, while wet vegetation harbors different predator assemblages than dry conditions. Your evaluation of flight safety balances immediate activity needs against environmental hazards. Basking behavior becomes essential for restoring flight capability as cool, humid conditions reduce muscle temperature below optimal function thresholds. You position yourself to capture available solar radiation while maintaining protective positioning relative to vulnerable brood areas. The thermoregulation process must balance personal needs with continued protective responsibilities. Structural damage assessment follows systematic protocols that identify areas requiring immediate repair versus those that can await optimal construction conditions. Water damage to paper structures often manifests as delamination, fiber separation, or localized weakening that threatens structural integrity. Your inspection techniques distinguish between cosmetic damage and serious structural problems. The reinforcement of soggy fiber spots requires techniques adapted to working with moisture-compromised materials. Standard pulp application methods fail when substrate moisture prevents proper adhesion, demanding modified approaches that account for altered material properties. Your construction adaptations demonstrate behavioral flexibility in response to environmental challenges. Calm restoration occurs gradually as normal environmental conditions return and storm-related stress responses fade from colony consciousness. The resumption of routine activities provides psychological comfort that balances the anxiety generated by weather-related threats. Your participation in this emotional regulation contributes to colony-wide resilience and recovery. Cyclical resilience emerges from repeated exposure to weather challenges that test colony, preparedness, and survival capabilities. Each successful storm passage strengthens both individual behavioral responses and collective defensive strategies. Your experience base expands to include additional environmental scenarios and proven response techniques. The reflective tone that characterizes post-storm periods provides opportunities for behavioral consolidation and stress recovery. Normal activities resume with renewed appreciation for routine processes that weather disruptions temporarily interrupt. Your psychological adaptation to cyclical environmental stress demonstrates the remarkable resilience that enables wasp colonies to survive in unpredictable climates. Parasitoid encounter. The metallic gleam that catches your peripheral vision triggers immediate alert responses as you identify the distinctive appearance of a cuckoo wasp conducting reconnaissance near the nest perimeter. These specialized parasitoids represent one of the most insidious threats to colony reproductive success, their larvae designed to consume developing wasp brood from within their own cells. Your detection of this infiltration attempt begins a defensive sequence that could determine the survival of dozens of developing sisters. The anomalous odor signature that accompanies the parasitoid confirms the visual identification while providing additional information about species identity and behavioral intent. Cuckoo wasps possess chemical profiles distinctly different from social wasps, lacking the colony-specific pheromones that characterize legitimate nest inhabitants. Your olfactory analysis indicates this is an active egg-laying female rather than a harmless male or newly emerged individual. Interception requires tactical positioning that prevents the parasitoid from reaching vulnerable brood cells while maintaining your own safety against a species evolved specifically to exploit wasp colonies. Your approach angle accounts for the cuckoo wasp's escape capabilities while positioning yourself between the threat and the most valuable brood areas. The engagement must occur before egg deposition begins. The grappling that ensues tests your combat capabilities against an opponent specialized for exactly this type of confrontation. Cuckoo wasps possess heavily armored cuticles and defensive adaptations that make them formidable opponents despite their typically smaller size. Your mandibles seek purchase on smooth metallic surfaces, while avoiding the parasitoid's own defensive weapons. Protective positioning over specific brood cells becomes critical as the combat continues, with your body shielding vulnerable larvae from potential ovipositor strikes. The parasitoid's reproductive strategy depends on inserting eggs directly into host brood cells, where developing parasitoid larvae will consume the legitimate wasp larvae before pupating in their stolen cells. Your physical barriers can prevent this reproductive theft. Alarm recruitment draws additional defenders as your pheromone releases signal the severity of the threat. Sisters converge to form layered defensive formations that overwhelm the parasitoid through numerical superiority. The collective response transforms individual defensive action into coordinated resistance that few parasitoids can overcome through persistence alone. The layered defense formation demonstrates sophisticated tactical coordination that emerges from simple behavioral rules. Each worker positions herself to provide backup for sisters already engaged, while maintaining readiness to assume primary defensive roles if frontline defenders become incapacitated. The formation provides redundant protection without wasteful overlap. Parasitoid ovipositor attempts create moments of extreme tension as the needle-like egg-laying apparatus probes for access to brood cells. Your mandibles intercept these strikes while maintaining combat engagement, requiring split-second timing and precise spatial awareness. Success in blocking oviposition attempts determines whether the encounter results in defensive victory or reproductive catastrophe. The eventual expulsion of the parasitoid occurs when sustained defensive pressure convinces the intruder that egg-laying success is impossible given current defensive intensity. Cuckoo wasps typically withdraw when energy costs exceed probable reproductive benefits, seeking easier targets that offer better risk-reward ratios. Your role in maintaining defensive pressure contributes directly to this tactical success. Death feigning represents a common parasitoid escape strategy that requires continued vigilance even after apparent defeat. The supposedly incapacitated cuckoo wasp may simply be waiting for defensive attention to relax before resuming infiltration attempts. Your second inspection ensures genuine departure rather than tactical deception designed to exploit defensive complacency. Cell rim sanitization becomes essential following parasitoid contact, as these specialists often carry chemical markers that could confuse colony recognition systems or attract additional parasitoid attention. Your mandible scraping removes foreign chemical residues while restoring normal scent profiles to affected areas. This chemical hygiene prevents cascading security problems. The heightened inspection routine that follows parasitoid encounters reflects learned responses to elevated threat levels. Your systematic examination of each brood cell searches for evidence of successful oviposition that escaped defensive notice. Early detection of parasitoid eggs allows their removal before larval development can progress to irreversible stages. Brood pheromone stress signals gradually decay as normal colony chemistry replaces the elevated alarm indicators generated during the defensive encounter. The chemical environment returns to baseline levels through metabolic breakdown and air circulation, allowing normal social interactions to resume without interference from residual stress indicators. Residual vigilance influences colony activity patterns for hours following parasitoid encounters, with workers maintaining elevated alertness for additional infiltration attempts. The behavioral modifications include increased perimeter patrols, enhanced chemical screening of approaching insects, and reduced tolerance for any anomalous activity near brood areas. This sustained defensive readiness provides extended protection against follow-up attacks. Thermoregulation, heat load. The relentless climb of afternoon temperatures transforms your nest environment into a thermal challenge that tests the collective engineering capabilities of the entire colony. Heat pulses radiate through the paper matrix as the sun reaches its zenith, warming the waxy cuticle of every worker until individual comfort becomes subordinate to the critical need for brood temperature control. Your papery city becomes a solar collector that threatens to cook the very larvae it was designed to protect. Your positioning within the nest's thermal management system reflects both individual thermoregulatory needs and collective responsibility for brood survival. The optimal locations for personal heat tolerance may not align with positions most effective for larval cooling, creating tension between self-preservation and colony welfare. Your choice to prioritize brood protection over personal comfort demonstrates the behavioral prioritization that characterizes successful social insects. Wing fanning choreography emerges as workers coordinate their ventilation efforts to create efficient air circulation patterns through the nest interior. Your wing stroke frequency and direction integrate with those of nearby sisters to generate convection currents that move heated air away from vulnerable brood areas while drawing cooler air through natural ventilation channels. The resulting airflow patterns rival sophisticated mechanical ventilation systems. Positioning relative to the brood cluster becomes a complex optimization problem that balances individual heat stress against collective cooling efficiency. Workers closest to developing larvae experience the highest heat loads, but provide the most effective thermal protection. Your participation in this thermal shield system accepts personal physiological stress to maintain optimal conditions for reproductive success. Evaporative cooling strategies involve the controlled use of regurgitated droplets positioned at strategic locations where evaporation can provide maximum cooling effect. Your contribution to this biological air conditioning system requires careful water management that balances cooling benefits against dehydration risks. The technique demonstrates sophisticated understanding of thermodynamic principles. Individual risk assessment weighs personal desiccation hazards against continued participation in collective cooling efforts. Your cuticle moisture loss accelerates under high temperature conditions, creating potential for dangerous dehydration if cooling duties extend beyond safe limits. The calculation involves real-time monitoring of personal hydration status and colony cooling needs. Micro breaks for hydration flights provide essential relief from thermal stress, while maintaining minimal disruption to cooling operations. Your brief departures for water collection must be timed to coincide with periods when your absence least compromises collective cooling efficiency. The scheduling requires coordination with sisters to ensure continuous thermal protection. Synchronized pauses in fanning activity prevent the turbulence that would result from uncoordinated wing beats operating at cross purposes. Your timing integrates with colony-wide rhythms that maximize air circulation efficiency while minimizing energy waste on conflicting airflows. The coordination emerges from behavioral responses to local air movement patterns rather than central control. Temperature normalization occurs gradually as thermal management systems achieve equilibrium between heat input and cooling capacity. Your monitoring of brood area temperatures provides feedback that guides adjustment of cooling intensity and duration. The successful maintenance of optimal thermal conditions requires continuous calibration of cooling effort to environmental demands. Fatigue signals accumulate as sustained wing fanning depletes energy reserves and strains flight muscles beyond normal operational parameters. Your recognition of physiological limits prevents overexertion that could compromise future flight capability, while maintaining commitment to thermal protection responsibilities. The balance between current cooling contributions and future operational capacity requires careful energy management. Slow grooming during cooling operations serves multiple functions, including heat dissipation through increased surface area exposure and maintenance of sensory equipment needed for thermal monitoring. Your antenna cleaning and wing adjustment activities contribute to personal thermoregulation while preserving the sensory capabilities essential for effective participation in collective cooling efforts. The drowsy narrative tempo that characterizes peak heat periods reflects the energy conservation strategies that help organisms survive thermal stress. Reduced activity levels minimize metabolic heat generation while preserving energy reserves for essential cooling operations. Your behavioral adaptations demonstrate the biological wisdom of accepting temporary inactivity to maintain long-term survival capability. Quiet thermal lulls provide opportunities for physiological recovery and stress hormone clearance that prepare for resumed normal activities when environmental conditions improve. Your participation in these rest periods contributes to colony-wide resilience while maintaining readiness for renewed cooling efforts if temperatures rise again. Ant encounter line. The first scout ant appears as a dark speck ascending the vertical support stem that anchors your nest to the overhang above. Its methodical exploration pattern indicating the systematic territory assessment that precedes major ant invasions. Your immediate recognition of this threat triggers responses calibrated by evolutionary arms races between ants and wasps conflicts that have shaped both species' behavior across millions of years of coexistence and competition. Chemical alarm placement by the scout represents the greatest immediate danger, as ant trail pheromones can persist for days and guide massive foraging columns directly to your nest entrance. Your interception must occur before this chemical marking becomes established, requiring rapid assessment of the ant species, size, and probable intentions. Some ant species pose minimal threat, while others could overwhelm even vigorous wasp defenses through sheer numerical superiority. The defensive secretion you apply to deter the climbing attempt utilizes specialized chemical compounds produced by glands, specifically evolved for anti-ant warfare. Your precise application targets the ant's sensory apparatus, while creating a chemical barrier that makes continued climbing uncomfortable or impossible. The secretion's effectiveness depends on proper concentration and strategic placement along likely approach routes. Coordinated antennal drumming provides communication that alerts nearby nestmates without triggering the broad alarm responses that would disrupt ongoing colony activities unnecessarily. Your tapping patterns convey specific information about threat type, location, and severity, allowing appropriate defensive measures without panic reactions that waste energy on excessive responses to manageable threats. Single ant removal technique demonstrates the surgical precision required for defensive actions that eliminate threats without escalating conflicts beyond necessary levels. Your mandibles seize the intruder with calculated forces sufficient to ensure control without causing injury that might trigger alarm pheromone release. The subsequent drop flight removes the threat while providing clear deterrent signals to any observing scouts. Preventing pheromone trail establishment requires systematic elimination of chemical markers that could guide future ant invasions. Your scraping of the petiole base removes any deposited trail substances while applying fresh defensive secretions that mask residual odors. This chemical warfare prevents small scouting expeditions from escalating into major colony assaults. The tactical nectar trip postponement reflects the strategic thinking that prioritizes security over immediate resource collection when threats remain unresolved. Your decision to maintain heightened defensive vigilance demonstrates understanding that allowing ant establishment near the nest could lead to sustained conflicts far more costly than temporary foraging delays. Later safe interval determination requires careful assessment of chemical indicator decay and behavioral signs that confirm genuine ant withdrawal rather than tactical repositioning. Your monitoring of pheromone concentration gradients and absence of new scout activity provides evidence that immediate threats have passed and normal activities can resume safely. Structural isolation principles guide long-term defensive strategies that minimize ant access opportunities through architectural design and environmental management. Your inspection of support structure integrity identifies potential climbing routes that could be modified to reduce future invasion risks. These preventive measures prove more efficient than repeated defensive encounters. Normal rhythm restoration occurs as chemical alarm indicators fade and behavioral stress responses return to baseline levels. Your participation in this transition helps maintain colony psychological stability while preserving learned vigilance that improves future threat detection. The balance between alertness and calm requires careful management to optimize both security and productivity. The lesson encoding process integrates new information about ant behavior patterns, effective defensive techniques, and early warning indicators into your growing database of security knowledge. Your experience with successful ant deterrence provides behavioral templates that can be applied to future encounters while adapting to species-specific variations in ant tactics and capabilities. Colony activity pattern adjustments reflect improved defensive awareness that incorporates ant threat assessments into routine planning decisions. Your modified behavior includes increased attention to ground-level activity, enhanced chemical monitoring of support structures, and coordination with sisters engaged in perimeter security. These adaptations demonstrate learning at both individual and collective levels. Environmental awareness expansion results from ant encounters that highlight the importance of understanding terrestrial threat vectors in addition to aerial predators and parasitoids. Your enhanced attention to ground-based activity patterns provides early warning capabilities that prevent minor scouting expeditions from developing into major invasions through timely intervention. Human disturbance below. The sudden vibration that travels through the nest support structure carries frequencies and patterns, unlike any natural phenomenon in your experience, immediately triggering alert responses calibrated for unknown but potentially catastrophic threats. The rhythmic impacts suggest large-scale mechanical activity below, accompanied by the distinctive chemical signatures of human presence that every successful wasp learns to recognize and evaluate for danger potential. Shadow size analysis becomes critical as the massive silhouette of human activity blocks familiar light patterns and creates visual disruptions that could indicate either direct threats or neutral activities occurring in proximity to your nest site. Your compound eyes process the geometric relationships between shadow size, movement patterns, and distance to assess whether this represents territorial intrusion or coincidental human activity. The heightened stillness response that spreads through the colony demonstrates collective threat assessment capabilities that emerge from individual behavioral rules rather than centralized decision-making. Your immobility contributes to a colony-wide freeze response that minimizes detection probability while maintaining readiness for rapid defensive action if the situation escalates beyond observation into active threat. One worker's startled movement threatens to trigger cascade alarm responses that could escalate the situation unnecessarily, releasing pheromone concentrations that might attract human attention while wasting energy on panic reactions to threats that may prove manageable through continued observation. Your intervention in this potential chain reaction demonstrates the social regulation mechanisms that prevent individual anxiety from compromising collective security. Slow antennal stroking provides the tactile reassurance that dampens developing alarm responses through direct physical contact that conveys calm assessment of the situation. Your soothing behavior serves multiple functions, including stress hormone regulation, behavioral coordination, and maintenance of the emotional stability essential for rational threat evaluation during uncertain circumstances. The metaphoric soothing quality of your calming activities extends beyond immediate tactical benefits to address the psychological stress that accompanies encounters with threats too large and unpredictable for standard defensive responses. Human presence represents forces beyond wasp influence or comprehension, requiring adaptation strategies that emphasize avoidance over confrontation. Human retreat provides resolution without escalation, confirming that the disturbance represented coincidental activity rather than directed threats against the colony. Your observation of withdrawal patterns provides learning opportunities about human behavior that can inform future responses to similar situations. The peaceful resolution validates defensive strategies based on concealment rather than aggression. Potential future risk assessment requires integration of this encounter into ongoing threat evaluation systems that guide site selection, defensive planning, and behavioral modifications. Your memory of human activity patterns around the nest site influences decisions about territory use, foraging route selection, and emergency response planning for subsequent encounters. Memory storage of human presence indicators creates behavioral templates that improve recognition and response capabilities for future encounters with similar threats. Your learning includes visual recognition of human artifacts, characteristic sounds and vibrations, and chemical signatures that provide early warning of human proximity before direct visual contact occurs. The distinction between true predators and large neutral presences requires sophisticated threat classification systems that prevent wasteful defensive responses to entities that pose no direct predation risk. Your behavioral differentiation between humans and genuine predators demonstrates cognitive flexibility that optimizes energy allocation for actual survival needs. Gentle return to brood care activities provides psychological restoration that balances the stress of threat encounters with the routine satisfactions of productive colony maintenance. Your resumption of normal responsibilities helps restore emotional equilibrium while maintaining the vigilance necessary for continued security awareness. Stress recovery mechanisms include gradual reduction of alarm pheromone concentrations, restoration of normal activity patterns, and behavioral reassurance that confirms continued colony safety. Your participation in these recovery processes contributes to collective resilience that enables successful adaptation to environmental challenges, including human presence. Bird-predator pass. The air pressure disturbance that precedes the sparrow's attack registers in your mechanoreceptors milliseconds before visual confirmation of the threat, providing the crucial early warning that separates survival from predation in encounters with aerial hunters. Your pressure-sensitive organs detect the wing beat signatures and air displacement patterns that characterize approaching birds, triggering evasive responses calibrated by countless generations of predator-prey evolution. Immediate zigzag evasive flight demonstrates the sophisticated aerial maneuvering capabilities that make wasps challenging prey despite their relatively simple wing architecture. Your rapid directional changes exploit the superior maneuverability that small size provides, while creating unpredictable flight paths that force predators to make constant course corrections that favor escape over capture. The drop-below branch cover utilizes environmental features to break visual contact with pursuing predators, while providing physical barriers that limit attack angles. Your tactical use of vegetation demonstrates spatial awareness that integrates three-dimensional landscape features into survival strategies. The effectiveness of this maneuver depends on precise timing and accurate assessment of cover availability. Collective defensive swarm formation represents an option that could overwhelm individual predators through coordinated group action, but the energy costs and risk of additional casualties must be weighed against the benefits of aggressive response. Your decision-making process evaluates threat persistence, predator species, and colony defensive capacity to determine optimal response strategies. The decision against pursuit reflects strategic thinking that prioritizes energy conservation over territorial assertion when predators retreat voluntarily. Chasing departing threats could expose pursuing wasps to additional predation while diverting energy from essential colony maintenance activities. Your restraint demonstrates the calculation that characterizes successful survival strategies. Counting missing nestmates provides damage assessment that determines whether the predator encounter resulted in casualties requiring colony response adjustments. Your systematic evaluation of returning workers identifies losses while gathering information about predator effectiveness and hunting patterns that could influence future defensive strategies. Subtle loss integration requires emotional and behavioral adjustments that account for reduced colony capacity while maintaining operational efficiency. Your adaptation to personnel changes demonstrates resilience mechanisms that allow continued function, despite the inevitable casualties that characterize Wasp social life. The psychological processing of losses influences risk assessment and defensive planning. Risk compensation through shortened foraging trips reflects learned caution that balances resource collection needs against elevated predation probability following predator encounters. Your modified behavior demonstrates behavioral plasticity that adapts activity patterns to changing threat levels while maintaining essential colony functions. Feeding stressed larvae provides emotional and nutritional support that addresses the elevated metabolic demands created by alarm responses and defensive activities. Your provisioning of developing brood helps maintain normal growth patterns despite environmental stress, while providing the nurturing activities that restore psychological equilibrium after threatening encounters. Pheromone calming involves chemical communication that gradually reduces alarm indicators and restores normal colony emotional climate. Your participation in this chemical regulation demonstrates the sophisticated communication systems that coordinate collective emotional responses while preventing prolonged stress that could compromise colony productivity. Internal risk threshold adjustment represents the learning component of predator encounters that improves future threat recognition and response capabilities. Your calibration of defensive triggers incorporates new information about predator behavior patterns, attack timing, and escape success rates into behavioral algorithms that optimize survival probability. Predator memory imprint creation establishes long-term behavioral modifications that improve recognition and avoidance of similar threats in future encounters. Your encoding of the shape of danger provides pattern recognition capabilities that enable proactive avoidance rather than reactive escape responses. Narrative reassurance emerges from successful predator avoidance that confirms the effectiveness of defensive strategies while maintaining confidence in survival capabilities. Your psychological processing of the encounter reinforces behavioral patterns that proved successful while identifying areas for improvement in future threat responses. Colony purpose reaffirmation occurs as normal activities resume and the temporary disruption of predator encounters fades into routine colony life. Your return to productive activities demonstrates the resilience that allows social insects to maintain focus on reproductive success, despite constant environmental challenges and mortality risks. Dusk transition. The rapid decline of light intensity triggers a cascade of physiological and behavioral adjustments as your ocelli detect the approaching end of the daily activity period. These simple photoreceptors, sensitive to overall illumination levels rather than detailed imagery, provide the primary timing signals that coordinate the transition from active foraging and maintenance activities to the reduced metabolism and defensive positioning that characterize wasp nighttime behavior. Your final nectar sweep targets the few flowers that remain accessible as most blossoms close their petals in response to decreasing light and falling temperatures. This last foraging opportunity requires careful energy calculation, balancing the diminishing returns of late-day nectar collection against the navigation challenges posed by reduced visibility and the elevated predation risks associated with twilight activity periods. Navigation during reduced visibility conditions demands increased reliance on chemical trail following and landmark recognition as visual cues become less reliable. Your return flight home utilizes scent plumes and memorized waypoints more heavily than usual, while maintaining heightened alertness for obstacles and predators that become harder to detect in gathering darkness. The familiar becomes uncertain as shadows obscure well-known features. The nest's evening routine emerges through collective behavioral adjustments that reduce activity levels while maintaining essential protective functions. Reduced wing noise minimizes acoustic signatures that could attract nocturnal predators, while clustered positioning provides thermal benefits and coordinated defensive capability. Your participation in this transition demonstrates the behavioral flexibility that adapts to daily environmental cycles. Larval grooming during the twilight period serves multiple functions, including final hygiene maintenance before the extended inactivity of night and the removal of accumulated debris that could create problems during the hours when active maintenance becomes impossible. Your systematic attention to brood cleanliness ensures optimal conditions for the continued development that occurs throughout the nocturnal period. The queen's reduced mobility reflects energy conservation strategies that preserve reproductive capacity while acknowledging the limited productive activities possible during darkness. Her continued pheromone distribution maintains social coordination and worker behavioral regulation, even as other activities decline. Your monitoring of her condition provides ongoing assessment of colony reproductive status. Securing your position near the brood cluster serves dual purposes of contributing to thermal buffering that protects developing larvae from nighttime temperature drops, while positioning yourself for rapid response to any nocturnal threats that might endanger the colony's reproductive investment. The positioning choice balances personal comfort with collective welfare. Metabolic rate reduction represents an energy conservation strategy that extends limited fuel reserves through the non-productive hours of darkness, when foraging becomes impossible. Your physiological adjustments include decreased muscle activity, reduced sensory processing, and lowered core temperature that minimizes caloric consumption while maintaining readiness for emergency responses. Internal calm develops as the urgent pressures of daily survival temporarily relax and the immediate threats of predation, competition, and resource scarcity recede into manageable background concerns. Your psychological adaptation to nighttime conditions provides the emotional restoration necessary for renewed activity when dawn returns productive opportunities. Ambient night sounds create an acoustic environment distinctly different from the active buzz of daytime colony life. The distant calls of crickets, the rustling of nocturnal mammals, and the occasional hunting calls of owls provide environmental information, while creating a sonic backdrop that muffles the subtle sounds of nest activity from potential eavesdropping predators. The soft descent in narrative energy reflects the natural rhythm of daily cycles that govern biological activity patterns across most ecosystems. Your adaptation to this circadian progression demonstrates the deep integration of wasp behavior with environmental cycles that have remained consistent across evolutionary timescales. Temperature monitoring continues throughout the transition period as your thermoreceptors track the heat loss that accompanies solar radiation reduction. The gradual cooling requires behavioral adjustments that maintain optimal thermal conditions for brood development, while managing personal thermoregulatory needs through positioning and metabolic modifications. Cluster formation provides collective thermal benefits that exceed individual thermoregulatory capabilities, while creating defensive configurations that improve security against nocturnal threats. Your participation in this social thermoregulation demonstrates cooperation that emerges from individual behavioral rules, rather than centralized planning or communication. Night stillness, micro-world. The profound stillness that descends with full darkness transforms your existence into a state of heightened sensory awareness, punctuated by the most minimal movements necessary for survival. Your body enters a condition resembling suspended animation, with only the slightest antennal twitches indicating continued consciousness, as these delicate organs sample the night air for chemical information that could signal danger or opportunity in the invisible world beyond the nest. Microantennal movements serve as your primary connection to the external environment during the hours when visual information becomes unreliable and most productive activities cease. These subtle sampling motions detect chemical gradients that could indicate approaching predators, changes in weather conditions, or the presence of other insects whose nighttime activities might affect colony security. Each twitch represents a conscious decision to gather information while minimizing energy expenditure. Low-level internal repair processes utilize the enforced inactivity of darkness to address the accumulated wear and tear that results from constant daily activity. Your cuticle undergoes microscopic maintenance that strengthens weak points and replaces worn surfaces, while muscle rest cycles allow recovery from the demanding flight activities that characterize Wasp existence. These biological maintenance operations occur automatically, but require energy allocation normally devoted to active behaviors. Fungal scent monitoring continues throughout the night, as your chemical surveillance systems maintain vigilance against the opportunistic pathogens that could exploit the humid, warm conditions within the nest to establish dangerous infections. The absence of rising fungal odors confirms the success of ongoing hygiene efforts while providing reassurance that the colony's health remains stable through the vulnerable nighttime period. Nocturnal moth investigation represents one of the few active responses triggered during the night stillness. As these large flying insects occasionally blunder into contact with the nest structure during their own nighttime activities, your assessment of these encounters involves rapid threat evaluation that distinguishes between harmless navigation errors and potential predatory investigations that might require defensive responses. Brain activity during the night stillness includes the offloading and consolidation of spatial data accumulated during the day's foraging and navigation activities. Your neural networks process and integrate the massive amounts of environmental information gathered during active periods, strengthening memory pathways that encode successful foraging routes, predator avoidance strategies, and resource location data, essential for future survival. Memory consolidation processes demonstrate the remarkable computational capabilities packed into your miniaturized nervous system as spatial relationships, chemical signatures, and behavioral patterns become integrated into the cognitive maps that guide future decision-making. This neurological housekeeping occurs during periods when immediate survival demands allow processing resources to focus on information management rather than real-time threat assessment. Sensory minimalism characterizes the night stillness experience, with normal sensory bombardment reduced to the essential monitoring necessary for basic survival. Your compound eyes detect only the most dramatic light changes, while chemical reception focuses on the most significant odor signatures. This sensory filtering conserves neural energy while maintaining awareness of genuinely important environmental changes. Heartbeat-like wing muscle pulses provide minimal circulation maintenance that preserves flight readiness without the energy costs of full muscle activation. These microcontractions prevent the muscle stiffness that could delay emergency flight responses while avoiding the metabolic demands of sustained activity. The rhythm creates a barely perceptible vibration that contributes to the nest's subtle nighttime acoustic signature. Time dilation effects emerge from the dramatically reduced activity levels and sensory input that characterize nighttime existence, creating subjective experiences where minutes stretch into seemingly extended periods of heightened awareness. Your perception of time passage differs markedly from the urgent pace of daytime activity, allowing deeper attention to subtle environmental changes normally overshadowed by active behaviors. Tranquil pacing reflects the biological wisdom of accepting enforced rest periods that restore both physical and psychological resources depleted during intense daily survival activities. Your adaptation to this circadian rhythm demonstrates evolutionary programming that optimizes energy allocation across 24-hour cycles, balancing productive activity with essential recovery processes. Pre-dawn temperature monitoring begins hours before sunrise, as your thermoreceptors detect the gradual cooling that reaches minimum levels just before dawn. This temperature awareness triggers subtle behavioral adjustments that prepare for the coming transition back to active life while managing the thermal challenges that accompany the coolest portion of the daily cycle. Cluster tightening occurs as workers respond collectively to temperature drops by reducing the spaces between individuals, creating more efficient thermal conservation that benefits the entire group. Your participation in this social thermoregulation demonstrates cooperative behavior that emerges automatically from individual responses to environmental conditions rather than conscious coordination. Slow fade preparation begins the gradual transition toward renewed activity as internal biological clocks anticipate the approaching dawn and the return of productive opportunities. Your psychological and physiological systems begin subtle preparations for the energy surge that will accompany sunrise and the resumption of foraging, construction, and defensive activities that define wasp existence. Mid-season brood surge. The exponential increase in colony population becomes unmistakably apparent as dozens of cell mouths gape simultaneously in synchronized hunger displays that transform the nest's acoustic environment into a constant, low-level drumming of larval demand. Your visual scan of the brood area reveals the remarkable success of early-season reproductive efforts, with developing larvae now representing a biomass that rivals the adult worker population in its metabolic demands and nutritional requirements. Logistic challenges multiply geometrically as the sheer number of hungry larvae overwhelms traditional foraging and feeding routines that proved adequate during earlier developmental phases. Your individual capacity for protein and carbohydrate collection remains constant while nutritional demands have tripled, creating mathematical pressures that force fundamental changes in colony organization and individual behavioral specialization. Specialization toward protein procurement represents your adaptive response to the crisis of scale that characterizes mid-season population explosions. Your foraging activities shift toward almost exclusive focus on hunting and prey processing, abandoning the mixed resource collection strategies that worked during smaller colony phases. This behavioral modification requires abandoning familiar routines in favor of high-risk, high-reward predatory activities. Task partition emergence demonstrates the self-organizing principles that allow social insect colonies to solve complex logistical problems through individual behavioral modifications rather than centralized planning. Age polyethism becomes pronounced as workers of different experience levels automatically assume specialized roles based on physiological capability and accumulated expertise, creating an efficient division of labor. Communication efficiency increases dramatically as the enlarged workforce develops streamlined protocols for information transfer and resource allocation. Your interactions with nestmates become more precisely focused and functionally specific, reducing the time and energy costs of social coordination while maximizing the productive outcomes of collective activities. Fewer mid-air collisions and territorial disputes reflect improved behavioral synchronization. Larval growth rate acceleration becomes visible on a daily basis, as adequate nutrition finally supports the developmental potential that protein limitations had previously constrained. Your feeding activities now produce immediate, measurable results in larval size and developmental progress, creating positive feedback loops that reinforce continued intensive provisioning efforts despite their physical demands. Pupation cap formation begins to appear throughout the brood area as the first larvae reach full size and begin the transformation process that will convert them into adult workers. These initial pupation events represent the beginning of the colony's reproductive payoff phase, when the enormous energy investment of the early season finally begins generating additional workers to share the expanding workload. Nest acoustic profile enrichment results from the layered wing buzz patterns created by increased numbers of workers conducting simultaneous activities throughout the three-dimensional structure. Your contribution to this sound environment becomes part of a complex acoustic signature that conveys information about colony health, activity levels, and developmental success to any organisms capable of interpreting these biological indicators. Anticipation of reproductive phase development creates subtle behavioral tensions, As the colony approaches the transition from pure worker production toward the energetically expensive process of raising reproductive individuals. Your awareness of approaching seasonal changes influences current activity priorities while creating psychological preparation for the fundamental shifts in colony focus that characterize late-season development. Energy demand peaks challenge every aspect of colony infrastructure and individual capability as the expanded population pushes resource requirements to the limits of what the territory can sustainably provide. Your own energy management becomes increasingly critical as the margin for error narrows and every calorie must be allocated with maximum efficiency to maintain colony viability. Fatigue risk management requires careful attention to individual physical limits as the intensified activity levels approach the boundaries of sustainable effort. Your monitoring of personal energy reserves and stress indicators guides decisions about activity, duration, and rest requirements that prevent burnout while maintaining essential contributions to colony productivity. Population density effects begin to influence social interactions as the enlarged workforce increases competition for preferred work sites and creates crowding pressures that require behavioral adaptations. Your navigation through increasingly busy nest interior requires enhanced spatial awareness and social coordination to prevent conflicts that could disrupt productive activities. Success metrics become apparent through multiple indicators, including brood developmental rates, worker emergence schedules, and territorial expansion that collectively demonstrate the colony's progress toward reproductive success. Your individual contributions to these collective achievements provide psychological satisfaction that reinforces continued intensive effort despite increasing physical demands. Dominance, social tensions. The subtle but persistent social pressures that accompany colony maturation manifest in increasingly frequent dominance displays, as older workers assert hierarchical positions near the queen's preferred resting areas. These lateral abdomen wagging threats represent ritualized aggression that establishes social precedents without the energy costs and injury risks associated with actual combat, but they create an undercurrent of tension that influences every social interaction within the nest. Your tactical avoidance of hierarchical escalation reflects calculated assessment of the cost-benefit ratios involved in status competition versus productive activity. Engaging in dominance contests could provide social advancement and preferential access to resources, but the energy expenditure and injury risks must be weighed against the opportunity costs of diverted effort from essential foraging and construction activities that directly support colony survival. Queen reinforcement of social control operates through multiple channels, including direct antennal stroking of potential competitors and strategic pheromone distribution that maintains the hormonal suppression essential for worker sterility. Her behavioral interventions in developing conflicts demonstrate sophisticated social management that preserves colony cohesion while preventing the reproductive competition that could fragment collective effort. Antennal stroking provides both chemical communication and tactile reassurance that diffuses tension while reinforcing social bonds between queen and workers. Your reception of this attention conveys specific information about your status within the colony hierarchy, while delivering pheromone doses that maintain the physiological suppression of your own reproductive development. Suppressed worker ovarian activation occasionally breaks through hormonal controls, as individual workers experience brief periods of reproductive readiness that challenge the queen's monopoly on egg production. These instances create immediate social crises, requiring swift intervention to prevent the establishment of competing reproductive lines that could destroy colony, unity, and productive focus. Policing behavior emerges automatically when workers detect unauthorized reproductive activity, triggering swift removal of any eggs laid by reproductively active workers. Your participation in this enforcement demonstrates collective commitment to maintaining reproductive monopoly systems that concentrate resources on queen offspring rather than dispersing effort across multiple competing lineages. Egg removal operations require careful coordination to ensure complete elimination of competing reproductive efforts, while avoiding damage to legitimate queen-laid eggs in adjacent cells. Your discrimination between authorized and unauthorized eggs relies on chemical signatures and contextual cues that identify reproductive transgressions requiring immediate corrective action. Subtle vibrations serve as de-escalation signals that provide face-saving alternatives to direct confrontation when dominance disputes threaten to escalate beyond productive levels. Your use of these communication channels demonstrates sophisticated conflict management that preserves social relationships while resolving status disagreements through ritualized, rather than destructive means. Collective benefit prioritization requires individual behavioral modifications that subordinate personal advancement to colony welfare during periods when social tensions could compromise essential activities. Your recognition that stability serves everyone's long-term interests guides decisions to avoid conflicts that might provide short-term advantages at the cost of overall colony productivity. Cognitive framing of social organization emphasizes the emergent properties that arise from simple behavioral rules rather than conscious planning or complex social negotiations. Your understanding of hierarchical relationships operates through behavioral algorithms that respond to immediate social cues rather than abstract concepts of status or political maneuvering. Comparative calm intervals between conflict episodes provide opportunities for social tension recovery and reinforcement of cooperative behaviors that form the foundation of successful colony operation. Your participation in these peaceful interludes helps restore the emotional equilibrium necessary for sustained collective effort while maintaining awareness of ongoing social dynamics. Reproductive phase preparation requires careful management of social tensions that could intensify as the colony approaches the resource-intensive period of male and queen production. Your behavioral adaptations include increased tolerance for hierarchical displays and enhanced cooperation with dominant workers, whose support will be essential during upcoming reproductive investment phases. Cooperative resilience emerges from successful tension management that channels competitive energies toward collective goals rather than destructive internal conflicts. Your contribution to this social stability demonstrates the behavioral flexibility that allows complex societies to maintain cohesion despite the individual drives and ambitions that could otherwise fragment group effort. Emergent order development shows how sophisticated social organizations can arise from relatively simple interaction rules without requiring complex planning or centralized control systems. Your participation in this self-organizing process contributes to collective intelligence that exceeds the sum of individual cognitive capabilities through cooperative behavioral coordination. False alarm. Real threat. The sudden shift from routine tranquility to high alert begins with a chemical signature that your antennae interpret as foreign and potentially threatening, triggering immediate readiness postures throughout your section of the nest. Your rapid assessment of the scent concentration and dispersal pattern suggests an approaching danger, but the molecular composition carries subtle inconsistencies that experienced chemoreception should probably catch. The alarm spreads through nearby workers as each individual responds to both the original stimulus and the behavioral changes of alert nestmates. Rapid readiness posturing demonstrates the remarkable speed with which social insect colonies can mobilize defensive responses, transforming from peaceful productivity to coordinated resistance within seconds. Your wing positioning shifts to aggressive display configuration, while your abdomen curves to expose the sting, creating visual threat signals designed to discourage potential attackers. This energetically expensive positioning can be maintained only briefly before fatigue demands either action or de-escalation. The energy waste inherent in false alarm responses becomes apparent as minutes pass without materialization of the expected threat, while your elevated metabolism and stress hormone levels continue depleting resources that could otherwise support productive activities. Your body maintains combat readiness, despite growing evidence that the initial stimulus may have been misinterpreted, demonstrating the conservative bias that favors false alarms over missed genuine threats. Discrimination learning occurs as analysis of the chemical signature reveals subtle differences from authentic threat, indicators the flowery undertones that identify the source as drifting pollen rather than predator pheromones. Your sensory processing improves through this comparison between alarm triggers and actual threat characteristics, refining the threshold parameters that guide future defensive responses. The genuine threat materializes shortly after false alarm recovery, as predatory hornet scouts begin systematic perimeter reconnaissance that represents far more serious danger than the misidentified flower scent. Your detection of these authentic predators requires entirely different response protocols, as hornets possess the size, weaponry, and tactical sophistication to overwhelm wasp colonies through sustained assault rather than opportunistic raids. High alert mobilization transforms the entire colony into a coordinated defensive network as authentic threat pheromones trigger maximum response protocols. Your positioning within the defensive formation provides mutual support with nearby workers, while maintaining flexibility for rapid tactical adjustments as the situation develops. The collective response emerges from individual behavioral rules rather than centralized command structures. Defensive curtain formation creates layered protection zones that funnel potential attackers through predetermined engagement areas where defensive advantages favor colony survival. Your position contributes to spatial barriers that limit hornet approach angles while providing multiple fallback positions if initial defense lines become compromised. The tactical sophistication rivals military formations despite emerging from simple behavioral algorithms. Hornet testing behavior involves probing attacks designed to assess defensive capabilities and identify weak points for subsequent exploitation. Your response to these reconnaissance efforts requires balancing aggressive deterrence against resource conservation, as prolonged defensive activity could exhaust colony capability before genuine assault begins. Each defensive engagement provides information to both sides about relative capabilities and tactical options. Multi-angle defensive lunges coordinate to present attacking hornets with simultaneous threats from multiple directions, overwhelming their ability to defend against all attacks while maintaining their own offensive capability. Your participation in these coordinated strikes demonstrates collective tactical intelligence that exceeds individual combat capabilities through synchronized action timing and spatial positioning. Minimal stinging strategy preserves limited venom reserves for situations where chemical weapons provide decisive tactical advantages, while relying primarily on mechanical combat and intimidation displays for routine defensive encounters. Your restraint in venom deployment reflects energy conservation principles that balance immediate defensive needs against long-term survival requirements. Sustained siege avoidance represents the strategic objective that guides tactical decisions throughout the encounter, as prolonged conflicts favor attackers with superior individual capability over defenders dependent on collective coordination. Your assessment of engagement duration and intensity helps determine when continued resistance becomes counterproductive and alternative strategies should be considered. Hornet departure signals the successful completion of defensive objectives through demonstration of colony, capability, and determination, rather than through decisive victory in combat. Your monitoring of withdrawal patterns provides intelligence about attacker assessment of colony strength and likelihood of renewed assault attempts that could require continued defensive preparation. Debrief activities include chemical communication that spreads information about threat characteristics, defensive effectiveness, and tactical lessons throughout the colony workforce. Your participation in this information sharing contributes to collective learning that improves future defensive capabilities while identifying individuals and techniques that proved most effective during the encounter. Sensitivity threshold adjustment represents the learning outcome that balances improved threat discrimination against maintained vigilance for genuine dangers. Your recalibration of defensive triggers incorporates lessons from both false alarm energy waste and successful threat response, optimizing future resource allocation for maximum survival benefit. Nest hygiene, fungal control. The humid conditions that accompany several days of intermittent rainfall create an environmental challenge that transforms routine nest maintenance into a critical battle against opportunistic pathogens seeking to exploit the elevated moisture levels within your paper city. Your detection of the first visible fungal growth, a small but ominous dark speck appearing on a cell, wall triggers immediate recognition that colony survival may depend on swift and comprehensive hygiene intervention. Contaminated fiber removal requires surgical precision as you carefully excise the affected paper material while avoiding damage to surrounding structural elements that remain healthy. Your mandibles work with deliberate control to prevent the mechanical disturbance that could scatter fungal spores throughout the nest interior while maintaining the structural integrity essential for continued colony function. Each cut must balance thoroughness against conservation of irreplaceable construction material. Mid-flight debris disposal demonstrates the logistical complexity of maintaining sanitary conditions within a three-dimensional living space, where contaminated materials must be transported away from vulnerable areas without creating secondary contamination sites. Your flight path selection minimizes exposure of clean nest areas to potentially infectious cargo while ensuring safe disposal at sufficient distance to prevent recontamination through wind dispersal. Antimicrobial saliva application utilizes specialized chemical compounds produced by your salivary glands, specifically for pathogen control, representing millions of years of co-evolutionary arms races between social insects and the microorganisms that threaten colony health. Your precise application targets affected areas with biological antiseptics while avoiding oversaturation that could weaken paper structures through excessive moisture exposure. Fanning operations accelerate moisture removal through forced air circulation that creates convection currents, specifically designed to dry problematic zones, while maintaining optimal humidity levels in areas where complete desiccation could damage developing brood. Your wing positioning and stroke frequency coordinate with other workers to maximize drying efficiency while preventing the air turbulence that could redistribute spores. Grooming cluster formation provides mutual cleaning that reduces individual spore loads while creating social bonding opportunities that reinforce cooperative behaviors essential for successful hygiene maintenance. Your participation in reciprocal cleaning demonstrates the sophisticated social coordination that emerges when individual health directly affects collective survival, creating behavioral incentives for mutual care. Spore load reduction operates through mechanical removal of contaminating particles that accumulate on body surfaces during hygiene activities, preventing individual workers from becoming vectors for pathogen distribution throughout previously clean areas. Your systematic cleaning of antennae, legs, and wing surfaces requires careful attention to areas that normal grooming might miss. Larval waste management intensification responds to elevated infection risks by increasing the frequency and thoroughness of frass removal operations that eliminate the organic matter accumulations where bacterial and fungal growth could establish footholds. Your expanded waste disposal activities require significant energy investment, but provide essential protection for vulnerable developing larvae. Odor baseline reestablishment involves the gradual restoration of normal nest chemical signatures through successful pathogen elimination and resumption of routine activities. Your monitoring of chemical indicators provides feedback about hygiene success, while detecting any residual contamination that could support renewed pathogen growth if not addressed promptly. Energy trade-off calculations weigh the immediate costs of intensive hygiene activities against the catastrophic losses that could result from uncontrolled pathogen establishment within the colony. decision to prioritize cleaning over foraging reflects strategic thinking that sacrifices short-term resource acquisition to preserve long-term survival capability. Preventative microvent creation involves strategic thinning of paper walls in locations where improved air circulation can prevent moisture accumulation without compromising structural integrity. Your construction modifications demonstrate architectural understanding that integrates ventilation requirements with load-bearing necessities and thermal insulation properties. Colony health stabilization occurs gradually as comprehensive hygiene measures successfully eliminate pathogen threats while restoring environmental conditions that support normal biological functions. Your contribution to this restoration provides psychological satisfaction that reinforces continued vigilance and maintenance behaviors essential for preventing future hygiene crises. Brood odor clarity improvement signals successful pathogen elimination as the chemical signatures of healthy larval development replace the off-odors associated with bacterial contamination and fungal growth. Your monitoring of these chemical indicators provides real-time feedback about the effectiveness of hygiene interventions while confirming the safety of continued brood care activities. Proactive maintenance principles emerge from successful hygiene crisis management, establishing behavioral patterns that prevent minor moisture problems from developing into major pathogen threats. Your adoption of enhanced monitoring and prevention activities demonstrates learning that improves long-term colony resilience while reducing the likelihood of future hygiene emergencies. Storm front. Environmental sensing. The barometric pressure changes that precede major weather systems register in your internal pressure sensors hours before any visible atmospheric disturbance appears on the horizon, triggering a complex cascade of behavioral preparations that demonstrate the remarkable environmental sensitivity evolution has refined across millions of years of storm survival. Your restless wing shivers indicate physiological responses to atmospheric conditions that human weather instruments are only beginning to understand. Foraging curtailment decisions require balancing immediate resource needs against the escalating risks of being caught in exposed positions when storm conditions arrive. Your assessment of current food reserves and colony nutritional status guides calculations about acceptable risk levels for continued resource collection activities, while environmental indicators provide increasingly urgent warnings about approaching weather dangers. Sugar stockpiling represents an emergency provisioning strategy that attempts to accumulate sufficient carbohydrate reserves to sustain colony metabolism through the period of enforced inactivity that severe weather will impose. Your intensive nectar collection focuses on rapid resource acquisition rather than optimal foraging efficiency, accepting higher energy expenditure ratios in exchange for maximum resource accumulation before conditions deteriorate. Structural reinforcement activities focus on critical attachment points, where mechanical stress concentrations could lead to catastrophic failure if storm winds exceed design limitations. Your inspection and reinforcement of the petiole connection involves applying additional pulp material and adjusting load distribution patterns to improve resistance against the aerodynamic forces that threaten structural integrity. Weight load distribution modifications spread mechanical stresses across larger structural areas to prevent the stress concentrations that could lead to localized failures during high wind conditions. Your construction work redistributes accumulated moisture and adds strategic reinforcement that improves overall structural resilience while maintaining the flexibility necessary for survival under dynamic loading conditions. Lightning detection capabilities allow recognition of electromagnetic phenomena that accompany severe thunderstorms, providing early warning of conditions that pose direct threats to exposed insects through electrical discharge and the intense sound waves that follow lightning strikes. Your behavioral responses to these environmental indicators demonstrate sensitivity to physical phenomena that extend far beyond normal sensory modalities. Low-frequency vibration sensing through the support beam provides information about wind conditions and structural stress levels that visual assessment cannot detect. Your interpretation of these mechanical signals guides decisions about additional reinforcement needs and helps predict when conditions may exceed the structural limits of current nest configuration. Heavy wind buffeting creates aerodynamic challenges that threaten both structural integrity and individual safety, as exposed workers risk being separated from the nest by wind forces beyond their flight control capabilities. Your positioning decisions balance personal safety against collective protective responsibilities, while maintaining readiness for emergency structural support activities. Clustering for aerodynamic stabilization demonstrates collective behavioral responses that reduce individual wind exposure, while providing mutual physical support during periods of extreme environmental stress. Your participation in these defensive formations contributes to group stability, while benefiting from the protection that coordinated positioning provides against wind forces. Post-storm damage assessment requires systematic evaluation of structural integrity and identification of repair priorities that will restore protective capability before subsequent weather threats arrive. Your inspection protocols distinguish between cosmetic damage that can await optimal repair conditions and critical failures that demand immediate attention, regardless of resource availability. Minor cell loss acceptance reflects realistic assessment of storm damage that acknowledges some structural casualties as inevitable consequences of surviving extreme weather events. Your patching activities focus on maintaining overall structural integrity rather than attempting perfect restoration of pre-storm conditions, balancing repair effort against available resources. Resource deficit recognition acknowledges that storm-related activity interruptions will require accelerated resource acquisition to compensate for lost foraging time and elevated energy expenditure during emergency preparations. Your planning for post-storm intensified hunting and nectar collection demonstrates forward thinking that prepares for predictable consequences of weather disruption. Adaptive scheduling capabilities allow behavioral flexibility that responds to changing environmental conditions by modifying activity patterns and priority allocations. Your ability to compress essential activities into available time windows while postponing non-critical tasks demonstrates the temporal management skills that enable survival in unpredictable environments. Rhythmic recovery patterns emerge from successful storm survival as normal activities gradually resume and environmental stress indicators return to baseline levels. Your participation in this restoration process contributes to colony-wide resilience, while incorporating lessons learned from weather challenges into future preparedness strategies. Male emergence. The first eclosion events that produce adult males from their pupal cells create immediate and unmistakable changes in colony atmosphere, as these reproductively focused individuals emerge with behavioral priorities fundamentally different from the worker-oriented activities that have dominated colony life throughout the preceding months. Your recognition of their distinctive, longer antennae, more slender waists, and altered behavioral patterns signals the beginning of the reproductive phase that represents the ultimate purpose of all previous colony investment. Behavioral differences become immediately apparent as newly emerged males demonstrate little interest in the construction, maintenance, and foraging activities that consume worker attention, instead focusing their energy on flight practice and the development of aerial maneuvering skills that will prove essential for their future reproductive success. Your observation of their extended practice flights reveals capabilities optimized for mate-seeking rather than resource collection. Nutritional role shift requires fundamental changes in your provisioning activities, as the developing larvae, destined to become future queens, demand protein-rich diets that exceed normal worker nutritional requirements. Your hunting and feeding efforts must intensify to support the enhanced development that produces reproductive individuals capable of establishing new colonies, creating resource pressures that strain existing foraging capabilities. Larval diet enrichment involves providing additional amino acids, lipids, and specialized nutrients that support the enlarged body size and enhanced reproductive organs that distinguish queens from workers. Your contribution to this nutritional investment represents the colony's transition from growth phase to reproductive output, where current resources support future colony establishment rather than immediate survival needs. Colony energy redistribution becomes necessary as non-foraging males consume resources without contributing to resource acquisition, creating mathematical pressures that require increased productivity from remaining workers. Your workload intensification compensates for the economic drain that reproductive individuals represent while maintaining essential colony functions during this critical transition period. Nest acoustic environment changes reflect the higher wing beat frequency characteristic of male flight patterns, creating harmonic additions to the colony's sound signature that indicate reproductive phase progression. Your auditory monitoring of these acoustic changes provides information about male development success, while contributing to the complex acoustic ecology that characterizes mature colonies. Aerial traffic complexity increases dramatically as males conduct practice flights and territory assessment expeditions that create navigation challenges for workers attempting to maintain normal foraging schedules. Your flight path planning must account for increased collision risks while maintaining efficiency in resource collection activities that cannot be postponed during reproductive phase development. Collision avoidance protocols evolve to accommodate the altered flight patterns and priorities of male colony members, whose aerial activities follow different rules than worker foraging flights. Your development of new micronavigation techniques demonstrates behavioral flexibility that adapts to changing social conditions while maintaining operational efficiency in essential survival activities. Brief mentoring behavior emerges as experienced workers provide guidance to inexperienced males, whose survival skills remain underdeveloped despite their reproductive potential. Your occasional intervention to redirect confused males demonstrates social investment in reproductive success, even when these individuals provide no immediate return on effort investment. Gentle nudging interventions help orient disoriented males toward appropriate exit routes and behavior patterns, without the aggressive responses that might be directed toward genuine intruders or threats. Your recognition of their legitimate colony membership guides behavioral responses that balance tolerance with the need to maintain productive activity patterns. Permanent departure acceptance requires emotional adjustment to the reality that successfully developed males will leave the colony permanently to pursue reproductive opportunities elsewhere. Your psychological adaptation to these departures demonstrates the emotional resilience necessary for social species, where individual relationships must be subordinated to reproductive success. Emotional neutrality contrasts sharply with human sentiment about family relationships, as your behavioral programming prioritizes collective reproductive success over individual attachment to specific colony members. This evolutionary adaptation prevents emotional conflicts that could interfere with the strategic decisions necessary for optimal resource allocation during reproductive phases. Colony purpose reframing shifts. Focus from growth and survival toward reproductive output that justifies the enormous energy investment required to raise reproductive individuals. Your understanding of this transition helps maintain motivation for continued intensive effort, despite the immediate costs and disruptions that reproductive phase development creates. Nutritional prioritization intensifies as resource allocation decisions increasingly favor reproductive development over maintenance activities that can be deferred or minimized during the critical period, when future colony establishment depends on successful reproductive individual production. Your participation in this strategic shift demonstrates behavioral flexibility that adapts to changing colony priorities. Queen rearing intensive. The identification of select larvae destined for queen development marks the beginning of the most resource-intensive phase of colony investment, as these specially chosen individuals receive nutritional treatment that will determine their reproductive capacity and survival probability as future colony founders. Your role in this elite provisioning requires precision and dedication that exceeds all previous feeding activities. as the quality of care provided during these critical developmental stages directly influences the genetic legacy of your entire colony. Enlarged cell modifications demonstrate the architectural adaptations necessary to accommodate the increased body size that queen development requires, with workers carefully expanding selected cells to provide the additional volume that larger pupae will need during their extended developmental period. Your construction work involves delicate structural modifications that maintain cell integrity while creating space for the enhanced growth that distinguishes reproductive individuals from workers. Protein concentration in queen larval diets reaches levels that strain colony hunting capabilities to their maximum sustainable limits, as the amino acid requirements for proper reproductive organ development demand constant procurement of high-quality prey. Your hunting activities intensify to provide the premium nutrition that supports ovarian development and the physiological capabilities that future queens will need for successful independent colony establishment. Rich secretion feeding involves the provision of specialized glandular products that contain concentrated nutrients and hormonal precursors essential for queen development. Your participation in this elite feeding program requires the production and transfer of valuable bodily secretions that represent significant personal energy investment but provide irreplaceable developmental support for reproductive individuals. Prestige feeding expeditions target the highest quality prey available within your foraging range, prioritizing nutritional value over energy efficiency in resource collection strategies designed to maximize the developmental potential of future queens. Your hunting behavior shifts toward longer-range, higher-risk activities that seek premium protein sources regardless of the elevated energy costs and predation risks involved. Queen cell guarding becomes a specialized responsibility that requires constant vigilance against accidental damage, parasitoid attacks, and any disturbances that could disrupt the critical developmental processes occurring within these precious cells. Your protective positioning demonstrates recognition that these larvae represent the colony's entire reproductive investment and future survival prospects. Accidental damage prevention requires extraordinary care during all activities conducted near developing queen cells, as the enlarged larvae possess increased vulnerability to mechanical injury that could destroy weeks of intensive nutritional investment. Your movement patterns adapt to minimize vibration and contact risks while maintaining essential colony functions in the vicinity of these critical development sites. Hormonal scent recognition allows identification of the chemical signatures that indicate successful queen development, as specialized pheromone production begins during late larval stages, and provides feedback about the effectiveness of intensive feeding programs. Your monitoring of these developmental indicators guides continued investment decisions while confirming progress towards successful reproductive individual production. Future reproductive generation awareness creates psychological investment in activities whose benefits will extend far beyond your individual lifespan, as successful queen production represents the continuation of your genetic lineage through colonies that may persist for years beyond current colony duration. Your participation in this temporal investment demonstrates behavioral programming that prioritizes long-term genetic success over immediate individual benefits. Worker cohesion strengthens during queen rearing phases as the shared investment in reproductive success creates common purpose that transcends individual interests and potential conflicts. Your cooperation with sisters intensifies during this critical period, when collective effort determines whether months of previous investment will produce successful reproductive output or result in complete developmental failure. Conflict minimization becomes essential during queen rearing periods, when any disruption of intensive feeding schedules or protective activities could compromise reproductive development success. Your avoidance of territorial disputes and status conflicts demonstrates behavioral prioritization that subordinates individual advancement to collective reproductive achievement during these critical developmental periods. Energy drain acknowledgement requires realistic assessment of the physiological costs associated with intensive reproductive investment, as your flight muscles and hunting capabilities operate at maximum sustainable levels for extended periods. Your body condition monitoring guides decisions about activity duration and rest requirements that prevent total exhaustion while maintaining essential contributions to queen development support. Strain recognition helps identify the physical and psychological stress indicators that signal approaching limits of sustainable effort, as the intensive activities required for successful queen rearing push individual capabilities toward levels that could compromise long-term survival. Your self-assessment capabilities guide strategic rest and recovery decisions that maintain productive capability throughout the demanding reproductive phase. Quiet pride emerges from successful participation in reproductive investment activities that represent the ultimate purpose of all previous colony efforts. As queen development provides tangible evidence of collective achievement and genetic success, your psychological satisfaction with these activities reinforces continued intensive effort despite the physical demands and personal sacrifices involved. Evolutionary fulfillment reflects the deep biological satisfaction that accompanies successful completion of activities that serve the fundamental reproductive imperatives encoded in your genetic programming. Your sense of purpose during queen rearing demonstrates the motivational systems that evolution has developed to ensure continued investment in reproductively essential but individually costly activities. Approaching senescence preparation begins as successful reproductive investment signals the approaching end of colony productivity and the transition toward the seasonal decline that characterizes wasp social cycles. Your awareness of these temporal patterns influences behavioral priorities while maintaining focus on completing the reproductive phase that justifies all previous efforts and sacrifices. Colony aging, pheromone decline. The gradual weakening of the founding queen's chemical influence becomes unmistakably apparent as her pheromone production declines from the robust concentrations that previously maintained tight behavioral control throughout the concentrations becomes colony. Your detection of these diminishing chemical signals triggers subtle but significant changes in behavior patterns, as the hormonal suppression that prevented individual reproductive impulses begins to weaken, creating new psychological and social dynamics within the aging community. Worker behavior loosening manifests as decreased responsiveness to traditional coordination signals and increased variation in individual activity patterns that previously showed remarkable uniformity. Your own behavioral modifications include longer decision-making periods, increased exploration of alternative activity options, and reduced automatic compliance with social cues that once provided unquestioned guidance for behavioral choices. Idle wandering increases throughout the colony as workers experience reduced drive for traditional productive activities, while lacking clear alternative behavioral programs to channel their energy and attention. Your occasional participation in these seemingly purposeless movements reflects the psychological adjustment required when lifetime behavioral patterns lose their chemical reinforcement and social validation. Task efficiency deterioration becomes evident as the precise coordination that characterized peak colony performance gives way to more variable and less predictable individual contributions to collective activities. Your own work patterns show increased variation in quality and timing as the neurochemical systems that previously ensured consistent performance respond to altered hormonal environments. Mixed role resumption represents your adaptive response to declining specialization, as reduced social coordination creates opportunities and necessities for behavioral flexibility that earlier colony phases discouraged. Your participation in diverse activities demonstrates the underlying behavioral capabilities that specialization had temporarily suppressed, revealing the full range of Wasp behavioral potential. Rogue worker. Reproductive attempts increase as pheromone suppression weakens sufficiently to allow ovarian development in individuals whose reproductive systems remain dormant throughout the previous months of queen dominance. Your monitoring of these unauthorized breeding activities requires increased vigilance and occasional participation in policing behaviors that maintain reproductive monopoly systems. Swift policing responses emerge as workers collectively recognize the threats that unauthorized reproduction poses to remaining colony, cohesion, and resource allocation efficiency. Your participation in egg removal activities demonstrates continued commitment to collective welfare, even as individual reproductive impulses gain strength and social control systems weaken. Structural wear accumulation becomes increasingly visible as the paper matrix shows signs of weathering, mechanical stress, and repeated repair cycles that have gradually reduced construction quality and aesthetic consistency. Your assessment of structural deterioration guides repair priorities while acknowledging that aging infrastructure requires more frequent maintenance to preserve basic functionality. Paper darkening occurs through accumulated environmental exposure and repeated wetting-drying cycles that gradually alter the color and texture of construction materials, originally bright and uniform in appearance. Your work with weathered materials demonstrates adaptive construction techniques that accommodate changed material properties while maintaining essential structural integrity. Frayed edge proliferation creates minor maintenance requirements throughout the nest structure, as normal wear patterns create irregularities that could provide entry points for parasites or compromise thermal insulation effectiveness. Your systematic attention to these minor repairs prevents gradual deterioration from accumulating into major structural failures. Parasite scouting intensification occurs as opportunistic mites, bacteria, and other organisms detect chemical and physical indicators of colony vulnerability that accompany aging and reduced defensive vigor. Your enhanced surveillance activities focus on early detection and elimination of these threats before they can establish populations in the compromised environment. Lowered defense vigilance reflects both reduced chemical coordination and individual fatigue that accompanies prolonged intensive activity throughout the productive season. Your assessment of these changes guides behavioral adaptations that maintain essential protective functions while acknowledging reduced collective capability for sustained defensive responses. Emotional undertones of impermanence begin to influence psychological responses to daily activities, as awareness of approaching seasonal decline creates subtle but significant changes in motivation patterns and behavioral priorities. Your adaptation to these psychological shifts demonstrates emotional resilience that maintains functionality despite awareness of temporal limitations. Cyclical nature recognition emerges from accumulated experience with seasonal patterns that repeat annually in social wasp biology, providing perspective that contextualizes current changes within natural temporal cycles rather than viewing them as unique catastrophic events. Your understanding of these patterns influences behavioral responses while maintaining psychological equilibrium. Personal fatigue documentation becomes apparent through visible signs of accumulated wear, including wing edge damage, antenna wear patterns, and reduced flight performance that reflect months of intensive activity under challenging environmental conditions. Your monitoring of personal condition guides activity modifications while maintaining essential contributions to colony functions. Physical wear indicators provide feedback about the accumulated costs of social wasp lifestyle, with body condition changes that document the energy expenditure and mechanical stress associated with constant foraging, construction, and defensive activities. Your assessment of these changes influences decisions about activity, intensity, and duration during the remaining active period. Wing edge nicks accumulate through repeated contact with vegetation, construction materials, and predator encounters that gradually reduce flight efficiency. while creating distinctive individual identification markers. Your accommodation of these performance changes demonstrates behavioral flexibility that adapts to declining physical capabilities while maintaining essential survival functions. Predators, opportunists. The robber fly that materializes from seemingly empty air demonstrates the remarkable camouflage and patience that characterizes ambush predators specializing in aerial interception of flying insects. Your peripheral vision detection of metallic movement triggers immediate evasive responses, as recognition systems identify the distinctive body shape and flight pattern of these dangerous hunters, whose speed and precision make them among the most feared predators in the wasp world. Evasive spiral maneuvers exploit the superior maneuverability that your smaller size provides, while creating unpredictable flight paths that force pursuing predators to make constant course corrections that favor escape over successful capture. Your aerial tactics demonstrate sophisticated understanding of relative performance capabilities that maximize survival probability during predator encounters that could prove fatal within seconds of initial contact. Foraging route modification reflects adaptive learning that incorporates predator encounter information into future navigation planning, avoiding areas where robber fly ambush sites concentrate while maintaining access to essential resource areas. Your mental mapping of predation risk zones demonstrates cognitive flexibility that balances resource access needs against survival requirements in environments where wrong route choices prove permanently costly. Spider web proliferation creates an increasingly hazardous navigation environment, as seasonal changes in arthropod populations result in expanded web construction throughout your foraging territory. Your detection and avoidance of these nearly invisible traps requires constant vigilance and energy-expensive route modifications that add time and risk to every resource collection expedition. Seasonal risk profile shifts acknowledge changing predator activity patterns that accompany autumn environmental changes, with different species becoming active while others reduce their hunting intensity in preparation for overwintering or migration activities. Your behavioral adaptations to these temporal changes demonstrate awareness of seasonal ecology that extends beyond immediate survival needs. Shorter foraging loops represent conservative response strategies that reduce exposure time and distance from safe refuge while maintaining minimum resource collection necessary for continued survival. Your route planning increasingly emphasizes efficiency and safety over optimal resource extraction. As environmental hazards multiply and individual resilience decreases with accumulated fatigue, defensive coordination deterioration becomes apparent as reduced worker numbers and declining chemical communication compromise the collective responses that previously provided effective protection against individual threats. Your assessment of reduced defensive capability guides behavioral modifications that emphasize avoidance over confrontation when dealing with predators and competitors. Scavenger ant intensification reflects increased competitive pressure as ant colonies detect chemical indicators of wasp colony decline and intensify their efforts to claim resources that weakened wasps can no longer defend effectively. Your encounters with increasingly bold ant foragers require enhanced vigilance and modified territorial defense strategies. Resource reclamation acceleration occurs as ants and other scavengers develop more efficient systems for capturing dropped materials and accessing previously protected resource sources. Your observation of these competitive changes influences foraging behavior while highlighting the declining territorial control that accompanies colony aging. System endpoint approach becomes psychologically apparent as multiple indicators suggest that colony productivity has peaked and the natural decline phase has begun according to seasonal patterns that characterize annual social wasp cycles. Your awareness of these temporal dynamics influences behavioral priorities while maintaining focus on essential survival activities. Loss acceptance emerges as accumulated casualties and declining recruitment create mathematical realities that cannot be changed through increased effort or improved efficiency. Your emotional adaptation to these losses demonstrates psychological resilience that maintains functionality despite awareness of inevitable mortality and colony decline patterns. Designed endpoint recognition provides perspective that contextualizes current challenges within the natural temporal framework that governs social wasp biology, where colony decline represents successful completion of reproductive cycles rather than failure to maintain previous performance levels. Your understanding of these patterns influences psychological responses to changing conditions. Purpose over longevity, prioritization guides, behavioral decisions that emphasize completion of essential reproductive and survival activities rather than attempting to extend individual or colony lifespan beyond sustainable limits. Your focus on meaningful activity rather than mere persistence demonstrates adaptive goal modification that maximizes achievement within available temporal and resource constraints. Emotional framing techniques help maintain psychological equilibrium during periods of decline. By emphasizing accomplishments and successful completion of life cycle phases rather than focusing on losses and reduced capabilities, your mental processing of these changes influences motivation patterns while preserving dignity and purpose during challenging transitions. Narrative cadence slowdown reflects both physiological changes associated with aging and reduced energy availability, and psychological adaptation to temporal awareness that influences activity, pacing, and priority allocation. Your behavioral tempo adjustments demonstrate flexibility that maintains essential functions while adapting to changed circumstances and capabilities. Queen rearing completion. The emergence of the first newly developed queens represents the culmination of months of intensive colony investment. As these magnificent reproductive females emerge from their enlarged cells with the enhanced body size, robust flight capabilities, and developed reproductive organs that will determine their success as future colony founders. Your observation of their initial movements reveals the immediate behavioral differences that distinguish these precious individuals from the workers who have devoted their lives to supporting their development. Enhanced nutritional investment verification becomes apparent through visual assessment of queen body condition, with the enlarged abdomens, robust flight muscles, and glossy cuticle that indicate successful conversion of intensive feeding into the physiological capabilities essential for independent survival and reproduction. Your recognition of these quality indicators provides feedback about the effectiveness of months of premium resource allocation and specialized care. Flight capability testing occurs as newly emerged queens conduct extended practice, flights that demonstrate the aerial proficiency they will need for mate location, territory assessment, and eventual dispersal to establish new colonies. Your monitoring of these initial flights provides assessment of developmental success, while noting the superior flight performance that distinguishes reproductively capable individuals from workers. Behavioral independence becomes immediately apparent as queens show little interest in colony maintenance activities, instead focusing their attention on personal preparation for the reproductive challenges that await them beyond the natal nest. Your observation of this behavioral divergence confirms successful completion of the developmental process that transforms colony-focused larvae into independently motivated reproductive individuals. Mate-seeking preparation involves queens developing the pheromone production and reception capabilities that will enable successful reproduction with males from other colonies. Your detection of these specialized chemical signatures confirms reproductive maturity while noting the distinctive scent profiles that differentiate queens from workers and provide essential communication capabilities for future reproductive success. Resource allocation completion signals the end of the intensive feeding phase that has dominated colony activities for weeks. As successfully developed, queens no longer require the premium nutrition that supported their growth and development. Your transition away from specialized provisioning activities represents both relief from demanding resource procurement and recognition that major colony objectives have been achieved. Genetic legacy establishment provides deep satisfaction, as successful queen production represents the ultimate justification for all previous colony efforts and individual sacrifices. Your contribution to this reproductive success ensures genetic continuation through future colonies that may persist for years beyond current colony duration, providing evolutionary fulfillment that transcends individual mortality concerns. Dispersal preparation activities include queens developing the environmental assessment capabilities and survival skills necessary for successful territory, location, and initial colony establishment. Your observation of these behavioral developments confirms readiness for independent survival, while noting the remarkable transformation from dependent larvae to capable reproductive individuals. Colony, mission, fulfillment, acknowledgement emerges as successful queen production validates the biological purpose that has driven all previous activities and justified the enormous energy expenditure associated with social wasp lifestyle. Your recognition of this achievement provides psychological closure that helps frame subsequent colony decline as natural progression rather than failure. Future colony establishment anticipation recognizes that successful queens will soon depart to establish new colonies that carry forward the genetic achievements of current reproductive investment. Your understanding of this temporal progression provides perspective that contextualizes current efforts within larger biological cycles that extend far beyond individual or colony lifespans. Investment return realization becomes apparent as the enormous resource costs associated with queen rearing produce tangible reproductive output that justifies months of intensive effort and sacrifice. Your assessment of this achievement provides validation for continued effort while recognizing that major colony objectives have been successfully completed. Reduced provisioning pressure allows gradual reduction in the intensive hunting and feeding activities that characterized queen rearing phases, providing opportunities for increased attention to personal maintenance and colony infrastructure needs that were deferred during periods of maximum reproductive investment. Territory patrol modifications. The systematic reduction of territorial patrol activities reflects both declining worker numbers and strategic reallocation of limited energy resources toward essential survival functions, rather than maintenance of expansive territorial claims that exceeded current defensive capabilities. Your modified patrol routes focus on core areas immediately surrounding the nest, while acknowledging that peripheral territory control has become unsustainable given reduced workforce capacity. Boundary contraction decisions require careful assessment of which territorial areas provide essential resources versus those that represent luxury holdings that can be abandoned without compromising basic survival needs. Your participation in these strategic withdrawals demonstrates adaptive resource management that prioritizes conservation of energy for critical activities rather than attempting to maintain previous territorial extent through unsustainable effort. Defense prioritization shifts toward protection of core resources and nest approaches, while accepting reduced control over marginal areas that previously received regular patrol attention. Your behavioral adaptations focus defensive effort where it provides maximum survival benefit, rather than dispersing limited capability across territorial ranges that exceed current capacity to defend effectively. Intrusion tolerance increases as reduced patrol frequency allows minor territorial violations that would previously have triggered immediate defensive responses. Your modified response thresholds balance energy conservation against territorial protection, while acknowledging that some boundary flexibility becomes necessary when enforcement capability declines below optimal levels. Resource consolidation strategies. focus protection efforts on the most productive and accessible foraging areas, while allowing competitors to claim peripheral resources that require excessive energy expenditure to defend. Your tactical decisions demonstrate understanding that territorial efficiency matters more than territorial extent when resources become limited. Patrol schedule reduction reflects realistic assessment of workforce capability limitations that make previous patrol frequency unsustainable without compromising other essential colony functions. Your participation in modified patrol routines demonstrates adaptive scheduling that maintains minimum territorial security while preserving energy for vital survival activities. Strategic withdrawal implementation involves gradual abandonment of distant territorial holdings through reduced patrol presence and decreased enforcement of boundary violations. Your behavioral modifications signal territorial availability to competitors while conserving energy for protection of core areas that remain essential for colony survival. Essential area identification focuses protective efforts on territory zones that provide irreplaceable resources or critical defensive positions that justify continued investment of limited defensive capability. Your assessment of territorial value guides strategic decisions about resource allocation while maintaining protection for truly essential holdings. Competition accommodation acknowledges increased pressure from neighboring wasp colonies and other territorial species who detect opportunity in reduced patrol activity and territorial enforcement capability. Your behavioral adaptations include increased tolerance for boundary flexibility while maintaining protection of core survival resources. Energy efficiency optimization guides all territorial decisions as limited worker capacity requires maximum strategic value from every energy expenditure on territorial activities. Your participation in these efficiency improvements demonstrates learning that adapts territorial strategy to match current capability rather than attempting to maintain previous performance levels through unsustainable effort. Flexible boundary management allows tactical adjustments that respond to changing competitive pressure and resource availability without rigid adherence to historical territorial claims that may no longer serve current survival needs. Your behavioral flexibility demonstrates adaptive strategy that prioritizes function over tradition in territorial management decisions. Late season hunting intensity. The desperate quality that characterizes late-season protein procurement reflects the mathematical reality that declining worker numbers must somehow maintain adequate nutrition for remaining colony members while supporting the final phases of reproductive development. Your hunting activities intensify beyond previous sustainable levels as biological imperatives override normal energy conservation strategies, creating a period of maximum effort that tests individual capabilities to their absolute limits. Expanded hunting range exploration requires venturing into unfamiliar territory where predation risks and navigation challenges increase dramatically, but where unexploited prey populations might provide the protein concentrations necessary for continued colony survival. Your willingness to accept these elevated risks demonstrates behavioral flexibility that adapts to changing circumstances, even when familiar strategies prove inadequate. Risk tolerance elevation becomes apparent as hunger drives acceptance of hunting opportunities that previous risk assessment protocols would have rejected as excessively dangerous. Your modified behavioral thresholds reflect desperation mathematics, where potential starvation creates willingness to engage larger prey, venture into predator territory, and extend hunting activities into marginal time periods. Prey size targeting shifts toward larger individual catches that provide greater protein yields per successful hunt, compensating for reduced hunting frequency through increased efficiency per successful encounter. Your tactical adaptations include willingness to engage caterpillars and other prey that previously seemed too large or dangerous for profitable exploitation. Extended hunting duration stretches individual foraging expeditions beyond normal safety limits, as the need for successful protein acquisition overrides typical return schedule constraints. Your modified temporal budgeting demonstrates recognition that current circumstances require exceptional effort levels, despite increased exposure to environmental hazards and predation risks. Competitive displacement occurs as multiple colonies experience similar protein pressures, creating intensified competition for limited prey resources throughout the shared foraging environment. Your encounters with rival hunters require enhanced territorial assertion while maintaining focus on essential resource acquisition, despite increased social conflict probability. Marginal prey acceptance includes species and individuals that optimal foraging theory would normally reject due to poor handling time versus nutrition ratios. Your behavioral modifications demonstrate desperation-driven flexibility that expands dietary options while accepting reduced efficiency in exchange for any available protein supplementation. Energy deficit accumulation becomes apparent as intensive hunting activities consume stored reserves faster than successful prey capture can replenish them, creating a negative feedback loop that threatens hunting capability just when maximum protein acquisition becomes most critical. Your monitoring of personal energy status guides tactical decisions about hunting, intensity, sustainability, fatigue. Override mechanisms suppress normal rest requirements and energy conservation behaviors to maintain hunting capacity during critical periods when protein acquisition determines colony survival probability. Your physiological adaptations demonstrate remarkable biological flexibility that temporarily suspends safety margins in favor of maximum productive effort. Success rate pressure intensifies as each hunting expedition must achieve higher success probability to justify the energy expenditure and risk exposure associated with continued predatory activity. Your hunting technique refinements focus on improving capture efficiency while reducing wasted effort on low-probability hunting attempts. Desperation mathematics govern behavioral decisions as simple survival calculations override complex optimization strategies that worked during periods of resource abundance. Your tactical simplification demonstrates adaptive decision-making that focuses on essential outcomes rather than theoretical efficiency when circumstances become critical. Structural abandonment. The systematic neglect of non-essential construction and maintenance activities signals a fundamental shift in resource allocation priorities, as limited worker capacity focuses exclusively on functions that directly support immediate survival rather than long-term infrastructure development. Your participation in this strategic abandonment demonstrates recognition that structural perfection becomes a luxury when basic biological needs strain available resources to their limits. Maintenance deferral decisions require careful assessment of which structural problems pose immediate safety threats versus those that represent aesthetic or minor functional issues that can be tolerated without compromising basic nest integrity. Your evaluation criteria shift toward emergency-only intervention standards that preserve energy for essential activities while accepting gradual deterioration of non-critical infrastructure elements. Repair prioritization focuses exclusively on structural failures that threaten brood protection or basic weather resistance, while allowing cosmetic damage and minor functional problems to accumulate without intervention. Your tactical maintenance approaches demonstrate understanding that perfect structural condition becomes unattainable when workforce capacity cannot support comprehensive infrastructure management. Construction halt acknowledgement marks the end of expansive building projects that characterized peak colony development phases, as remaining workers lack both the numbers and energy reserves necessary for major architectural undertakings. Your behavioral transition away from construction activities represents acceptance of current structural limitations rather than continued investment in facility expansion. Resource reallocation redirects materials and energy previously devoted to construction toward essential survival functions, including food procurement, brood care, and basic defensive activities. Your participation in this strategic shift demonstrates flexibility that adapts to changing priorities while maintaining focus on activities that provide immediate survival benefits. Infrastructure degradation acceptance involves psychological adjustment to declining aesthetic and functional standards, as aging structures show increasing signs of wear without receiving the maintenance attention that previously preserved. Optimal conditions. Your emotional adaptation to these changes demonstrates resilience that maintains functionality despite reduced environmental quality. Essential function preservation identifies the minimum structural requirements necessary for basic colony survival, while accepting degradation of systems that enhanced comfort or efficiency, but do not determine survival probability. Your assessment of these requirements guides strategic decisions about which infrastructure elements deserve continued maintenance investment. Deterioration tolerance increases as workers learn to function effectively despite structural problems that would previously have triggered immediate repair responses. Your behavioral adaptations demonstrate remarkable flexibility that maintains productivity despite suboptimal working conditions and reduced infrastructure quality. Energy conservation imperative drives all infrastructure decisions, as every calorie spent on construction or maintenance represents energy unavailable for foraging, hunting, or brood care activities that directly determine survival probability. Your participation in this resource management demonstrates understanding that survival takes precedence over environmental quality during resource-critical periods. Systematic neglect implementation involves conscious decisions to ignore structural problems that would normally receive attention, representing strategic resource allocation rather than careless maintenance oversight. Your behavioral modifications demonstrate disciplined priority management that focuses effort where it provides maximum survival benefit. Final preparation phase. The psychological preparation for colony senescence requires emotional adjustments that balance recognition of inevitable decline with continued motivation for essential survival activities during the remaining active period. Your mental adaptation to temporal limitations demonstrates resilience that maintains functionality, while processing the reality that individual and collective lifespans approach their natural endpoints according to biological programming that governs social wasp life cycles. Personal condition assessment reveals the accumulated effects of months of intensive activity, including wing wear, antenna damage, reduced flight performance, and general fatigue that characterizes the natural aging process in social insects. Your realistic evaluation of these limitations guides activity modifications that maximize remaining capability while acknowledging reduced capacity for sustained effort. Legacy activity completion focuses effort on finishing essential tasks that contribute to long-term colony success, rather than beginning new projects that cannot be completed given remaining time and energy constraints. Your behavioral prioritization demonstrates wisdom that emphasizes meaningful accomplishment rather than ambitious undertakings that exceed current realistic capabilities. Successor preparation activities include final training and resource transfer to younger workers who will carry primary responsibility for colony functions during any remaining active period. Your mentoring efforts represent investment in continuity that extends effective capability beyond individual participation, while ensuring essential knowledge transfer to emerging leaders. Resource consolidation efforts gather and organize remaining supplies to maximize their utility during final colony phases, while ensuring efficient access to materials that support essential survival functions. Your participation in these organizational activities demonstrates forward thinking that optimizes resource availability despite declining workforce capacity. Essential function identification determines which activities deserve continued attention versus those that can be discontinued without compromising basic survival during remaining colony lifespan. Your assessment of these priorities guides strategic decisions about effort allocation while maintaining focus on genuinely critical activities. Emotional closure development involves psychological processes that provide satisfaction with accomplished objectives while accepting the natural progression towards seasonal decline that characterizes annual social wasp cycles. Your mental preparation for this transition demonstrates emotional intelligence that maintains dignity and purpose during challenging life phases. Peaceful transition preparation includes behavioral modifications that reduce conflict and stress, while emphasizing cooperation and mutual support during final colony phases. Your participation in these social adjustments demonstrates wisdom that prioritizes harmony over individual advancement when time limitations make competitive behaviors counterproductive. Knowledge preservation efforts involve sharing accumulated experience and expertise with colony members who may benefit from this information during remaining active periods or future reproductive attempts. Your educational activities represent investment in collective capability that extends individual contribution beyond personal participation limits. Dignified conclusion. Orientation guides behavioral choices that emphasize meaningful activity and positive social interactions rather than merely extending activity duration without purpose or satisfaction. Your approach to these final phases demonstrates understanding that quality of experience matters more than quantity, when temporal constraints make extended planning impossible. Final foraging expeditions. The melancholic quality that infuses your final resource collection flights reflects awareness that each expedition may represent the last opportunity to experience the aerial freedom and purposeful activity that have defined your existence throughout the active season. Your flight patterns demonstrate the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of previous foraging trips, with navigation refined to perfection and energy management optimized through months of survival experience, yet tempered by the physical limitations that accumulate from constant use of wings, now showing clear signs of wear and reduced efficiency. Target selection becomes increasingly conservative as your assessment of personal flight capability guides decisions toward nearby, reliable resource sources, rather than the distant or challenging locations that might provide optimal nutrition but exceed current safe operational parameters. Your tactical choices reflect hard-won understanding of the relationship between energy expenditure and resource quality, prioritizing successful completion over ambitious objectives that could result in failed missions. Efficiency optimization reaches its peak expression as every aspect of foraging behavior demonstrates the refinement that comes from extensive experience, combined with awareness of limited remaining opportunities. Your flight paths eliminate unnecessary movements, while your resource evaluation techniques quickly identify the most productive targets, creating foraging sequences that maximize nutritional gain while minimizing time and energy expenditure. Familiar route preference becomes pronounced as navigation increasingly favors well-known pathways where landmark recognition and hazard awareness reduce cognitive load and navigation uncertainty. Your mental maps guide efficient movement through territory that holds years of accumulated spatial memory, providing psychological comfort alongside practical navigation benefits during expeditions that carry emotional weight beyond simple resource acquisition. Quality assessment expertise allows rapid evaluation of nectar concentration, protein content, and resource accessibility that guides tactical decisions about whether specific opportunities merit investigation or should be bypassed in favor of more promising alternatives. Your sensory discrimination capabilities, refined through countless previous evaluations, provide information processing that approaches laboratory precision in field conditions. Predation risk management becomes increasingly important as reduced flight performance creates vulnerability windows that require careful timing and route selection to minimize exposure to aerial predators and territorial competitors. Your awareness of these elevated risks influences all tactical decisions while maintaining focus on essential resource acquisition despite increased environmental dangers. Weather sensitivity increases as aging physiology becomes less tolerant of challenging environmental conditions that younger workers might navigate successfully. Your behavioral adaptations include enhanced weather monitoring and conservative decision-making that prioritizes safety over optimal resource timing, accepting reduced foraging opportunities rather than risking exposure to conditions that could prove fatal. Resource sharing dedication intensifies as awareness of limited remaining contribution time creates motivation to maximize the benefit that personal effort provides to colony survival and the well-being of younger workers who will continue essential activities. Your generosity with collected resources reflects understanding that individual consumption matters less than collective welfare during final activity phases. Nostalgia integration allows appreciation for the landscape features, seasonal changes, and environmental beauty that have provided the backdrop for months of survival activity. Your emotional responses to familiar foraging areas demonstrate the capacity for aesthetic appreciation that coexists with practical survival concerns, adding richness to final expeditions beyond their purely functional purposes. Memory consolidation occurs during flight activities, as navigation through familiar territory triggers recall of significant events, successful hunts, narrow escapes, and environmental changes witnessed throughout the active season. Your cognitive processing of these accumulated experiences creates meaning that transcends immediate resource acquisition objectives. Final territory survey provides comprehensive assessment of environmental changes that have occurred throughout the season, documenting shifts in vegetation, competitor populations, resource availability, and territorial boundaries that reflect the dynamic nature of ecosystem relationships. Your observations contribute to understanding that extends beyond immediate foraging objectives. Winter preparation instincts. The physiological changes that herald approaching dormancy begin to manifest as internal biological clocks respond to decreasing day length and falling temperatures with hormonal adjustments that prepare your body for the extended metabolic suppression that characterizes Wasp overwintering survival strategies. Your awareness of these developing changes creates psychological preparation for the fundamental lifestyle modifications that approaching winter will demand. Fat reserve accumulation becomes a critical priority as your body works to store sufficient lipid reserves to sustain minimal metabolic activity throughout months of enforced inactivity when foraging becomes impossible. Your feeding behavior shifts toward maximum caloric intake as biological programming overrides normal appetite regulation in favor of energy storage that will determine survival probability during the coming dormant period. Shelter assessment activities include evaluation of potential overwintering sites that provide protection from temperature extremes, moisture problems, and predators during the vulnerable months when flight capability and defensive responses become severely limited. Your exploration of tree bark crevices, soil cavities, and human-made structures demonstrates survival instincts that extend beyond current colony obligations. Activity reduction preparation involves gradual behavioral modifications that decrease energy expenditure in anticipation of the metabolic suppression that successful overwintering requires. Your movement patterns become increasingly conservative as biological programming begins the transition toward dormancy states that minimize resource consumption while maintaining essential life support functions. Territorial abandonment acceptance reflects recognition that individual survival requirements take precedence over collective territorial maintenance when seasonal transitions make colony-based activities unsustainable. Your psychological preparation for this independence transition demonstrates adaptability that facilitates survival strategy, changes according to biological life cycle requirements. Social bond attenuation begins as hormonal changes reduce the chemical attraction and behavioral coordination that maintained tight social integration throughout the active season. Your gradual emotional detachment from colony activities represents natural preparation for the solitary survival period that approaches with environmental changes. Cold tolerance development includes physiological adaptations that improve cellular resistance to freezing damage, while behavioral modifications reduce exposure to temperature extremes that could prove fatal during marginal survival. Periods. Your body's preparation for these challenges demonstrates remarkable biological engineering that enables survival in conditions that would quickly prove lethal without specialized adaptations. Metabolic adjustment preparation involves internal changes that will eventually allow survival on minimal energy input for extended periods when environmental conditions make active foraging impossible. Your physiological systems begin the gradual transition toward dormancy metabolism that represents one of nature's most remarkable survival adaptations. Independent psychology emerges as social dependencies gradually weaken and individual survival instincts gain prominence in behavioral decision-making. Your mental preparation for solitary survival represents fundamental reorientation from collective focus toward personal survival strategies that will determine individual fate during the coming winter period. Location selection criteria include factors such as thermal stability, moisture control, predator protection, and accessibility that will determine survival probability during months of extreme vulnerability. Your assessment of these environmental variables demonstrates sophisticated understanding of microhabitat requirements that enable successful overwintering. Colony dissolution. The gradual dispersal of remaining workers signals the beginning of colony dissolution as individuals respond to internal biological programming that shifts priority from collective activities toward personal survival preparation. Your observation of this natural social breakdown demonstrates the temporal limits that govern social wasp biology, where even the strongest cooperative bonds eventually yield to individual survival imperatives that override collaborative behaviors. Social bond weakening occurs as the pheromone systems that maintained behavioral coordination throughout the active season lose their effectiveness due to declining queen chemical influence and changing individual hormonal states. Your experience of reduced social attachment reflects natural psychological preparation for the independence that approaching winter survival will require. Individual priority emergence becomes apparent as workers increasingly focus on personal needs rather than collective welfare, with foraging activities shifting toward individual resource accumulation rather than colony provisioning. Your behavioral modifications demonstrate the transition from social cooperation toward individual survival strategies that characterize seasonal life cycle transitions. Queen mortality acceptance acknowledges the natural progression of reproductive cycles. As founding queens reach the end of their biological lifespan, having completed their reproductive mission through successful colony establishment and reproductive individual production. Your recognition of this mortality represents emotional maturity that processes loss within natural biological frameworks. Resource claim abandonment occurs as territorial boundaries lose meaning when insufficient workforce remains to maintain collective defensive capabilities. Your participation in this territorial dissolution demonstrates understanding that individual survival requirements supersede collective territorial maintenance when population levels become unsustainable. Nest abandonment preparation includes final resource collection from accumulated stores and removal of any materials that might support individual survival during the coming solitary period. Your systematic approach to this dissolution demonstrates practical wisdom that maximizes personal survival prospects while acknowledging the end of collective living arrangements. Individual foraging transition marks the shift from coordinated resource collection toward personal survival activities that prioritize individual needs over shared colony objectives. Your behavioral adaptations to this independence represent psychological flexibility that facilitates survival strategy changes according to seasonal requirements. Competitive interaction emergence occurs as former nestmates increasingly view each other as competitors for limited resources rather than cooperative partners in collective survival efforts. Your adaptation to these changed social dynamics demonstrates behavioral flexibility that adjusts relationship patterns according to environmental circumstances. Territorial dissolution finalization acknowledges that collective resource claims become meaningless when insufficient population remains to defend them against competitors who detect opportunity in weakened defensive capabilities. Your acceptance of this territorial loss represents realistic assessment of changed circumstances. Memory preservation efforts include final consolidation of spatial information, survival techniques, and environmental knowledge that will support individual survival during the coming solitary period. Your cognitive processing of accumulated experience demonstrates preparation for independent decision-making without social support systems. Final social interactions provide closure for relationships that have defined existence throughout the active season, while acknowledging that individual survival requirements now take precedence over social bonds. Your emotional processing of these transitions demonstrates psychological resilience that facilitates necessary lifestyle changes. Solitary survival mode. The profound psychological adjustment required for transition from intense social cooperation to complete individual self-reliance represents one of the most challenging adaptations in wasp biology, as behavioral patterns developed through months of collective living must be rapidly modified to support independent survival in an environment that offers no social support or shared defensive capabilities. Your mental preparation for this fundamental lifestyle change demonstrates remarkable cognitive flexibility that enables survival strategy transitions according to seasonal biological requirements. Individual responsibility expansion includes assumption of all survival functions previously shared among dozens of nestmates, from territory assessment and resource location to predator detection and environmental monitoring. Your behavioral adaptations require developing capabilities that were previously specialized among different workers, creating comprehensive survival competency that enables independent function. Social absence adjustment involves psychological processing of the isolation that replaces constant social stimulation and cooperative interaction with environmental silence, broken only by personal activity and external threats. Your emotional adaptation to this solitude demonstrates resilience that maintains psychological stability despite the loss of social support systems that provided security and purpose throughout the active season. Decision-making independence requires rapid development of individual judgment capabilities that replace the collective decision-making processes that previously guided behavioral choices through social consensus and chemical communication. Your cognitive adaptations include enhanced environmental assessment and risk evaluation that compensate for the loss of multiple perspective information processing. Resource monopolization behavior emerges as competitive awareness replaces cooperative sharing instincts, with individual survival requirements creating behavioral patterns that prioritize personal resource accumulation over any consideration of other individuals' needs. Your adaptation to this selfish survival strategy represents necessary psychological reorientation that facilitates independent survival. Territorial claims reduction focuses protective efforts on minimal areas that provide essential resources while abandoning the extensive territorial holdings that required collective defense capability to maintain. Your strategic territorial downsizing demonstrates tactical wisdom that matches defensive capability to realistic resource protection requirements. Enhanced vigilance development compensates for the loss of collective warning systems by increasing individual alertness and environmental monitoring that previously benefited from multiple observers and shared threat detection. Your sensory enhancement demonstrates biological adaptability that improves individual survival capabilities when social support becomes unavailable. Risk assessment modification requires recalibration of threat evaluation systems that previously relied on collective defensive capability and shared risk management. Your behavioral adaptations include increased conservatism and enhanced predator avoidance that compensate for reduced defensive options during solitary survival periods. Shelter selection criteria shift toward individual protection requirements that differ significantly from the environmental needs that characterized social living arrangements. Your evaluation of potential shelter sites demonstrates understanding of microhabitat requirements that enable solitary survival in conditions that would challenge collective defensive capabilities. Survival timeline awareness includes realistic assessment of individual survival prospects during environmental conditions that exceed the capability of single individuals to manage effectively. Your psychological preparation for these challenges demonstrates emotional maturity that processes mortality risk within natural biological frameworks.